friends. Welcome back to another episode of the unofficial companion podcast to HBO's hit show Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
Before we get into it, we've heard from a lot of our friends and listeners that you guys aren't maybe loving this season, but that you're loving the recaps, which is awesome for us. But I think this episode was a bit of a microcosm of that for me in the sense that I messaged you, Kristen, immediately after watching it. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? I wish I hadn't watched that. And you were like, you know what? I went through this with the Rishi episode last season. Yeah. I think you on second watch will get so much more out of it. And I 100% agreed. And I think for so many of you, that's kind of what's happening. I think the showrunners have really started creating excellent art. But the thing about art is there's art you see in a museum and you're like, wow, I understand what this is and what it's a reaction to and what it's talking about in terms of the broader social commentary. But you wouldn't necessarily want to hang that on your wall. You're like, I want a pretty painting on my wall and I want something to enjoy. And this is a very mentally and emotionally taxing episode. But I think once we get into it here, you will see why this was so rewarding. So for you guys out there who might be coming to this recap or might be hearing this recap before you watch the episode and then getting into it, I really want to say this is so valuable if you stick with it. There's so much here. And while it may not be fun to watch, it is a brilliant social and philosophical commentary that I think is like A+, 100% worth it.
I agree.
And for those of you who are new here, there are a lot of new faces. So we're just going to do a really quick reintroduction. I graduated from Princeton with a degree in English literature, went to work on Wall Street for the better part of a decade. I was really a markets and interest rate derivatives specialist. And Kristen here, Kristen, I'll let you give your backstory.
So I graduated from Brown. I studied biomedical mechanical engineering, went to work on Wall Street. I worked at Morgan Stanley in their investment banking division, capital markets division, a very brief stint in fixed income sales and trading as the world's collapsed during the great financial crisis, but then taught finance for the last 15 plus years. When we watched this show, we first saw it, we got so excited because we looked at this as a way to teach finance through the lens of pop culture. And so we literally started doing this last year, 18 months ago, where we went through episode by episode because there was just so much finance in each of these episodes. We were like, we have to break everything down. And then as we started to go through it, it was just like, again, the English literature major in Jen, I feel like was like, we need to talk about these themes. We need to talk about these things. So we are so grateful. HBO sends us the screeners ahead of time because we had a lot of people who were messaging us. They're like, how did you get that out so fast? And we're like,
because we were recording everything 2 years after the episodes originally aired because we discovered the series late. So we were playing quite a bit of catch up. And now we are all caught up and we are live. Like Kristen was just saying, if we don't get a reference, especially this season where it's very fintech heavy and it's UK and European oriented relative to our bias, which is obviously very American, please let us know. We love your contributions and we try to shout you guys out whenever you teach us something.
And also the film references.
Well, we're also just not professional film or TV critics.
Yes. So
we're journalists.
The perspective that we're coming to this from is we're having a blast trying to figure out what the writers are doing. We do not know what happens next. So this is our live reaction in real time.
Okay, so let's get started. This is season 4, episode 4, 1,000 Yoots and 1 Marilyn. The titles are getting more and more obscure. I did not have any clue what the title was about at first glance. And I was hoping we'd get some like very specific explanation. I think I know what's going on here. Never 100% sure after watching this episode 3 times that we did. Yoots is not a term I'd ever heard before. So in my Googling, I found that it's slang for youths, both in British and Italian American cultural references, specifically Joe Pesci and My Cousin Vinny. And Marilyn, listen, I do obviously think of Marilyn Monroe, which we will get to later.
All right, so with that, let's just dive right in. So the episode opens with Jim, who is talking to some woman. We've never seen her before. And she is talking about some piece that she's pitched someone. So she's clearly a writer on dating discourse. And she goes through a whole bunch of examples where she's talking about like body count. She's a 4, maybe a 6 after a few pints. And they go through all this stuff and they're walking into his house. And she has a baby carriage, by the way. And as they're walking in, he's very distracted because there is a car that has just been idling outside his house for a couple of days. And I think he obviously believes that someone is trying to follow him. So they're going into the apartment and the woman makes a statement. She says, there's a girl who fucks 1,000 guys in 24 hours for content. I mean, she wasn't fucking a person. She was fucking a number. And he says, yeah, individuals reduced to abstraction, Kierkegaard. And then he starts to get very more distracted because he believes someone has broken into her house. So I want to pause here because there is a lot to get into. And I know Jen has done like a full essay on this whole thing.
Start with the porn conversation and we'll come back to the philosophy. So she says, why is it you have to take something modern and make it for cunts? This is our referendum on pornography. And so this woman, Jim's apparent co-parent, as we'll find out, she is referencing specifically a story that drew a lot of attention in the news last year. There was a British porn star called Bonnie Blue, and she did this massive publicity stunt where she had men like literally lined up outside the door. And there was actually a documentary being filmed about it at the time, which is what sparked my attention and put it in the headlines for me, because I did not see the video that was the content that was made from this. But they were doing a documentary where they interviewed her afterwards, and she just looked utterly shell-shocked. And it called into question this whole thing of like, is she traumatized by this event as it seemed as they were filming her and asking her what it was like? Or later she came on and was like, no, I was just tired. I loved it. This was great. Like, I wish I could do more, right? And so it's getting back to our question that we raised in episodes 1 and 3, I think. I can't even remember where we talked about pornography at this point, but it's getting back to this question of who's fucking whom. Once you create something, does it belong to you? Does it belong to everyone else? Do you have agency in it? And actually, The Guardian wrote an article about Bonnie Blue in August of 2025 that I found. And the title was "Moral Outrage Over Bonnie Blue's Porn Empire Misses the Point. This is Hardcore Economics." The writer went on to say, a commercial instinct created her brand, a market sustains it, and mainstream businesses profit. It's a tale of very capitalist times.
Well, and by the way, yesterday there was an article that came out. Sophie Rain clears $100 million in gross earnings on OnlyFans.
And so what that article and what this dialogue about Sophie Rain, who I guess is an OnlyFans star, is getting at is the Guardian article was arguing that Bonnie Blue was effectively flipping the script. So she was trying to like rage bait people by being as outrageous as possible, kind of doing that all press is good press thing. And we can talk about how that ties into narratives. But also the article actually positioned her as a female Andrew Tate, arguing that what she said was teenage male and vulnerable audiences have a right to sex, and telling them this is what they are owed. So the idea of sex being owed to someone implies some transactional element that is, of course, very commercial, but also is the language of the incel community that Andrew Tate has kind of weaponized. So the author in that article said, her current nemesis is Visa, which processes OnlyFans payments, and which she says declined to be associated with her 1,000-man marathon, leading to her being banned from uploading it and cashing in. So I did not know that this had been part of the real life saga in the British courts. There was a task force on pornography in August of 2025, led by Tory peer Gabby Burton. So I didn't realize that there was someone who was having this played out in British politics with a name so similar to Jennifer Bevan. So I think that that's effectively the real life analog for Jennifer Bevan here. Correct. And so she was arguing for the ban on content likely to encourage child sexual abuse, which she argued could encompass barely legal material, which is what this was advertised as, is like these people are just over 18. So I got much more insight in going down the rabbit hole of looking into the Bonnie Blue episode that I don't know when this show was. It boggles my mind that this show could have been written in August of 2025, filmed, edited, and released in like 3 months' time. That doesn't seem right. But now we have a lot more real life historical context, both in the past in Britain and currently in America, for this extreme interweaving of capitalist tendencies and the pornographic spirit.
This is going to become a theme later, which is men who are consuming this content. Is this what they even want? And also, like, is this super damaging for the men as well? Like,
which has been a huge point of contention among many social pundits who have said that this is damaging male-female relationships, that this is rendering men ineffective, that this is, I mean, I'm not expressing this as a view, but like people have argued that this is a tool used by foreign governments to effectively neuter an entire population of men and keep them from being like a viable armed force, which is the theme that this show does in fact explore.
Back to the Henry thing too, giving people access to something that is, I mean, like there's supposed to be guardrails and friction to a lot of things for good reason. And this again becomes a whole conversation at the very end, which I think is brilliant, but whatever. So I'm not going to like,
but even in the meat of the episode, right? Because frictionless is the term, and we'll get to this, that Henry uses about the app. So 100%, I have that in my notes as well, where like the frictionlessness of pornography and its ubiquitous availability, is that right? Giving people, and we'll get to this line later, giving people what they want, but not what they think they want, or whatever that line is that Jim Diker has.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the democratization of finance, right? Oh, just make it all available to everyone without educating them about the risks.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is a brilliant opening to the episode.
Then there's also elements, they haven't gotten to this. I don't know if they will, but frictionlessness with gambling. I know like Scott Galloway has had his whole thing about just the damage that can potentially do. Anyone who has a addictive personality, it used to be you had to at least go to Vegas. Now it's you through the press of a button. It's just this dopamine hit. You could be freaking like betting on the number of yards someone is going to run in a football game instead of like, you at least like have to put money on one of the teams winning. Now it's like, oh, I'm gonna bet on this thing and this thing and this thing. And it's like, you keep hitting a button and your money can keep going down.
Yeah, I've never done any of these betting apps or sports betting. So I know we should do an entire episode on the big podcast about the betting markets because I really need to educate myself about those. Okay. So in case you haven't heard enough from me, and by the way, we're still in the first 37 seconds of the show.
I know.
In hearing this kind of rant from his co-parent, Jim reacts, individuals reduced to abstraction, Kierkegaard. Okay. I take it that this is not something you're familiar with. Like you said, you were studying biomedical and mechanical engineering. So like 19th century philosophers, maybe not your thing. I took something at Princeton called the humanities sequence my freshman year, where you read the entire Western canon basically from start to finish. And you go through the philosophers in order. And so you go from Hegel to Kierkegaard. And that's kind of the conventional thinking about classical philosophy. So what are we talking about here? And again, no detail in industry is accidental. So for those of you who are like, this girl's a dog with a bone, I might be totally wrong. But once I watched this on the second time, I saw Kierkegaard at the beginning. I was like, it all makes sense. So Soren Kierkegaard is a 19th century philosopher who's also known as the father of existentialism. And the most important way to understand him is actually as a reaction to another philosopher, Hegel. If you ever heard of the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic. So the way he saw the world, kind of like when you hear the Real Housewives talk about there's your truth, there's my truth, and the truth is somewhere in between. Okay, so he talked about understanding identity and truth as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you take two things that are effectively opposites of one and then you reconcile them by synthesizing them. In this very logical way, seeing everything as objective from almost like a God's eye view. Kierkegaard basically rejected that because he argued that it dissolved like real living individual experience into this abstraction. And so Kierkegaard was not the person who says like individuals reduced to abstraction is a good thing. He was the one who rejected it. And so for him, subjective experience, specifically with how you overcome anxiety through choice and ultimately faith, matters much more than any objective logical system. And he was religious, meaning you had to navigate, instead of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, you had to navigate the three stages towards enlightenment, transcendentalism, whatever you want to call it, to move from the aesthetic. So this hedonist, pleasure-seeking, very grounded in like sensation, to the ethical, where you're bound by moral obligation and duty and honor and all those things. And then finally, to move to the somewhat irrational state of religious faith by taking a leap. Now, the phrase leap of faith is associated with Kierkegaard. He is not the father of that phrase. He did not say you take a leap of faith. He talked about qualitative leaps, but it is the leap from the logical realm to the world of faith, which is illogical, but is ultimately the end goal and that transcendent goal. Therefore, it has been termed the leap of faith. There can also be a leap into sin, by the way. So like not all leaps are leaps into faith. They are just qualitative leaps where you are changing your state. Yeah. And so the second I heard Kierkegaard, immediately all of this starts swirling. And as we will see, there will be a very transformative leap for one of our characters.
I mean, this is why you have to watch it a couple times. So anyway, as they have this conversation, his co-parent is highly educated, seems like she's also a writer, but he's super distracted because he notices someone has jimmied open his window, broken into his apartment. There's papers everywhere. He is looking for keys to his Mercedes. And the woman's like, where is all this money coming from? So we don't really have an answer to this. We still have not been given an answer as to why he's so fixated on Tinder. Aside from at one point, he like profiled Whitney and he ghosted him, but we don't have a real reason. We don't know how he's affording this Mercedes. Regardless, she makes a comment to him and says, you look like shit. And he says, the Ritalin is messing up my skin. We noticed last episode that he was taking some kind of pill. So now we know that it's Ritalin. He says,
but
do
Ritalin
me a favor.
Is also like, I mean, a
speed.
Hop, skip, and a jump away from speed. Exactly. Yeah. So like he is super strung out, paranoid. And by the way, may I just say, it comes out that they slept together once. And this guy seems to have a track record of making exceptionally bad decisions when it comes to his sex life. Like, hey, slept with you once, this woman who clearly I don't get along with. And now we have to raise a child together. Slept with Hayley once. That was an error in judgment. And we'll see how bad it was.
But anyway, he says, could you basically, like, they have a son together. Can you take him while I sort this shit out? And she's like, we need to formalize some kind of custody arrangement. But she's letting him have his son and he doesn't want to take him. And I think that this is going to be interesting as we come back later to see what happens with another person and their son. So she then says, you realize nobody knows you exist. And he's just like, fuck off. And the scene ends. From here, we then go to the next scene. He's looking outside. He's taking his Ritalin. He's typing. He's sniffing. He falls asleep on his computer. He gets a call and it's his boss. He says, good news. We heard from Tender's counsel. I think they've come in way too hot to that Tender investigative piece. It's as subtle as a Slade song in truth. Injunction.
Slade song. It's like big, bold, like glam rock.
Got it. He says, I mean, it's a real dog's dinner. And I did a little digging and it seems upper management there are a proxy for the Norton Media Group, which we know, right? Norton newspapers, that's the whole thing with Yaz and Henry, blah, blah, blah. He says, so I'm happy to send you to Accra, which is what Jim has wanted this whole time. He's wanted to go and like do some investigative work on the ground there. He gets super excited. He's like, thank you. We won't be upset. But his boss does say the main thrust of their ire is collusion and market manipulation between you and these short sellers. I mean, that's a shot in the dark, right? Tell me you aren't inveigled with these fucking short sellers. So essentially Harper and Eric. And Jim says, I've spoken to them a little bit. It's like, I'm working on a follow-up. I'm going to get more meat on the bone from this Sunderland discovery. And Ed is like, I'm not going to be bullied, especially if Tender has designs to have the UK consumer wrapped up in some banking app. I want to make sure that people know what's going on.
Specifically what he says is he says, if I know anything about people who go nuclear this early, you can bet your loneliest penny the cunts have a glass fucking jaw. Meaning if you hit them, they will shatter because there is clearly something here because their strategy wasn't to like answer these questions piecemeal. Their strategy was to go totally nuclear and be like, nah, nothing, blah, 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 which is so true. It's like the lady doth protest too much. When you're like, hey, were you doing something sketchy? And someone's like, oh my God, I hate you. How dare you? Blah, 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 blah. You're like, whoa, I was just asking. Like, calm down. What's actually going on? It makes you more suspicious.
Yep. So anyway, so then Jim goes outside, he marches up to the car and says to the guy who's sitting in the car, why are you watching my house? And the guy's like, I'm waiting for my girl. And then Jim says, get this fuck off my street. There's a back and forth. I mean, the guy basically calls him the slur and then spits on him. And that's when there's kind of this like discordant menacing music and the words industry that pop up on the screen. I do think this is a random dude. Do you think
I do think so too. Yeah. They're showing that Jim is totally paranoid at this point. He's taking these pills. He's up in the middle of the night. He's doing all these things. Like, what is he seeing? We go back to our Henry Muck episode. Who's really there? Who's not? But also in the worlds of my old 5-year note trader, you're not paranoid if they're really out to get you. There is this sense that like, no, definitely someone had broken into his apartment. It wasn't just left like that, but he's kind of grasping at straws. And also he tries to like threaten the dude who he thinks is after him. And the dude immediately is like, way scarier, stronger, like more menacing than he is. So it shows Jim as kind of like this toothless agent in his own life. He's being totally ordered around by his baby mama. He's being ordered around by his editor. He's being ordered around by this random guy outside. He isn't powerful. He doesn't have agency in seeking this out. And the Tender thing is the only thing he has. He barely is like clinging to a shred of sanity. So they have set up the stakes very accurately for Jim here. Well, that, like, this is all he has.
I mean, it reminds me so much of Rishi too. Like there's so many parallels, and even actually Henry. It's like, what is the one thing they have? It's work.
Tender.
And it's
Tender. Well, it's all tied to Tender. Yes. It's either Tender being bad or Tender being good.
But it's also work. And it's funny because I was listening to someone talk about money's going to be gone in the future and like there's going to be no jobs with AI and all that. And I do think it's interesting that like we keep coming back to this thing of work giving people purpose and meaning amidst this chaotic world where you can get anything at your fingertips, and literally work is the thing that kind of keeps you sane. So anyway. Okay. So Jim is now outside the next scene. He's sitting on a bench. He's on the phone. He's talking to Harper. She says, all I've done is share non-private information, basically public information with you. And your article was a non-event. It helped our story for all of 20 minutes. So she's trying to say like, we are not colluding. Like there is nothing going on here. And Jim says,
she's like, you're not doing enough.
Yeah. He's like, do more. He says, well, proving a connection might be enough. Now I've started working with an air gap computer so it can't be hacked. And she goes, you're calling me on my work phone, you dumbass.
Although her work phone appears to be her cell phone.
Fair. Yes. Yeah. She asks when he's doing the follow-up and he says he can't tell her. She gets upset. She's like, I gave you the Sunderland information. You're supposed to write it up and disseminate it. That was agreed upon. Jim's like, we never agreed upon this. She's like, it was implied. And Eric is there just like, let's not keep saying this like on the phone. And then Jim says, I think you fundamentally misunderstood my ethics here. It's important that we deny any kind of communication. He says, I appreciate your time. And then again, he's walking through the park and looking around his shoulder to make sure that nobody's following him. So back at the office of Stern Tao, Eric says, if he doesn't publish again soon, what is our next negative catalyst? So I will add, I still do not understand why the hell any of them are going all in on shorting this company with nothing more than, I don't know, like I have this feeling that there might be some stuff going wrong, but they don't have a plan. They had like this one guy who they thought was going to publish something negative. It's funny. Someone said to us, Harper's not actually talented. She just relies on unethical information and stuff. But that's actually not the Harper we know. The Harper from season 1 was talented, was smart. And I actually think she has been with, yes, some of the questionable ethics. This is just stupid. I do not understand this trade.
I understand the trade as being we could play for a bit of a correction if the company that is looking to completely whitewash its image and now become, as we'll see, like a mortgage lender is in fact still processing porn payments, some of which may be illegal. Like there's definitely something there. Is this company going to zero based on maybe there's something there? It's not enough. I think there's enough here for a correction in the stock that Harper has, but Harper does not have actual knowledge of any
But also, like, how could there be a correction?
Legal wrongdoing.
I mean, if anything, they say the market's pricing this app launch as a positive one. So if anything, they know they're going to have a problem on their hands in the short term.
Of course. That's because the Sunderland story is not out. So Harper's whole conviction is if the Sunderland story comes out, it will offset the positive news from the app, which is positioning them as like, we can do it all. We're this great bank. The old banks are the way of the past. This is the bank of the future.
Yeah.
We're so great. And she's like, no, you're still processing porn payments and pretending they're not. But to me, that's like the smoking gun that's going to get you a correction, not a collapse.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, so Eric says if the stock climbs any higher, we'll face a margin call. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute or two. But Harper's clearly nervous. They don't know what to do. And she suggests, why don't we self-publish? We'll just get Sweet Pea to write it up like Hindenburg, Glass House, that sort of beat, which to your, Jen, your point. That
I
was
mentioned Hindenburg. I was so happy that I was like, again, every time I get validation that one of my real world connections was right, I get so excited.
Eric says, it's too clear a conflict of interest, which again, I don't understand why that would be a conflict of interest. This is what short sellers do all the time. Ackman goes out and talk about why they hate the fucking trade. I mean,
well, yeah, I think it's not like a conflict of interest in the legal way. It's just the market's not going to believe them. It's like, you're just saying this and we get that.
Well, no, because Harper says we've used the appropriate disclosures, which I guess to your point that if people will take it less seriously because they have personal gain.
No one's going to take this seriously as like some impartial research report written by like an independent buy-side research analyst. No, you're short. Everyone knows you're short. Like,
yeah. Well, and Eric then also says that their name just doesn't have the cachet.
Which I think is a much bigger issue, by the way.
Agreed.
Although in this day and age, increasingly not, right?
I know.
Increasingly, it's like if a legacy name, you're like, can't trust it because you're like, they just want the investment banking fees, blah, 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 like we talked about with the sell-side research analyst. If anything, it's like, ooh, an independent research analyst said this, like they must be really great. They must be onto something. But if you know they're short,
even if they also like have a freaking personal account. I mean, this is what's so wild about this like lack of trust in institutions is that I mean, the institutions have a much higher threshold for what they can put out there. I mean, it's like you look at even with Jim, he's like trying to get this shit and his boss is like, no, versus anyone can put out whatever they want, who by the way, could have their own personal account, like loaded up with something where they're going to make a quick buck on things. So it is interesting that there's been this massive loss in institutions, but there's so much more hamstrung. So I don't know. Anyway. Okay. So from here, we then go to the tender offices and there's actually two different meetings going on simultaneously. So the first meeting, we have Henry, who is looking at a mock-up of this app and he is in with the marketing team. So it is Robin, who we're going to come to find out, by the way, another female name. So the head of marketing is another female name. Unisex. Sorry, that is true. We find out his name is Robin Williamson. So they're doing a lot with like the Ricky Martin, Robin Williamson. I mean, that could be totally random. They're, like I said, talking about the app design, the user interface, the launch, blah, blah, blah. And so Henry says, I want the mortgage piece more prominent on the landing page, wipe the fucking crypto component off of it. I've given that note 3 times. And yes, Robin, so again, head of marketing dude, that is a user over profit decision because the UI is part of the messaging and the messaging is everything. Yeah, says to tone matters to our backers in the government too. because they now have buy-in from the UK government. But Henry is pissed off because I guess at the bottom of the app, it says Pierpoint powered by Tender, when, as he puts it, like it should be the opposite. Henry says, I didn't stake myself on the build of this app to facilitate Pierpoint giving the already upward mobile a fucking clickable option to passively compound their wealth.
Before we leave the app review, let's talk about kind of the real world precedent for this. So again, for those of you who've been following, I think the most on the up and up, still alive company that this is based on is Revolut. And Revolut apparently just launched mortgages this year through its Lithuanian bank. So the thing about mortgages, right? If you're PayPal, it's a big leap to just start being like, let's do mortgages, especially in the UK, where it's a very different lending system for residential loans than it is in the US, where we have Fannie and Freddie and the GSEs. So they need a bank with tons of capital behind them to be able to do those banking activities. And so they're sowing the seeds for why they're partnering with Pierpoint. But I think it's really interesting that Henry is all about getting rid of crypto, because I think to so many people, crypto at face value represents this like sketchy bro thing. And you think about like, who's using the DeFi world? Like you talked about crypto being used for illicit activities in the past. There's like this perception that it's not as safe. There's a perception that it can be used to finance sketchy activities. Whether or not this is a legitimate perception, I think it's one that Henry's implying. He wants to wipe off the face of this app, that he wants it to be on the up and up.
Crypto makes it feel less legit. I mean, it's might as well be processing the porn payments. You can basically process porn payments and have a crypto line.
That's exactly right. So he's saying like, I don't want ties to that sketchy world. Whether or not it's sketchy, we can argue. And he is very much set on this thing of like, I don't want to be facilitating wealthy people getting wealthier. This will be a theme throughout all the speeches he gives in this episode. And it's also a theme in all the conversations that are being had right now in the discourse about finance, that it's the democratization of access. I've always said, if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to puke. And when we started this company, right, it was like the democratization, and we'll get to that. But like, it's one of these things where Henry is like, I'm so noble. And you're watching this and you're like,
I said this in the last episode, but like we didn't know in season 3 who he was at his core. And I think we're starting to see more and more that he feels guilty about being born into privilege, wants to do good, wants to do the right thing. And I don't think anyone's a good person in this show, but like, I think he wants to be a good person. So for what it's worth.
Just the means of getting there, being like, instead of making money through my privilege and whatever, I want to make money by, to your point, making it frictionless for everyone else to access the banking system. Learning curve be damned. Right. I think it does come from like a morally good impulse within him, which we've seen. He's our new Robert, if anything. In this season. Robert used to be like, I'm looking to protect these girls, like blah, 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 blah. But he was still part of the system. I think he's taken that.
I agree. All right. So back in Stern Town, this is where we get a little bit of the financy stuff. So we hear Eric say to Kwabena, Bannerman, I guess we found out his last name as well. You want to give us a state of play. So this is to educate about essentially what is going on here. So Kwabena says 250 million assets under management, Eric's 5% of fund, $10, meaning $10 million. Pierre, the anchor, $100, and then further 150 million when we combine all other invested parties. So wow, they raised $140 million in addition to like the 100 that came from Pierre. Good job, guys. So he then says, with Kenny as our primary broker, we borrowed another $250 million via Deutsche Bank. That's our margin. So essentially they have, and they then do the math. They show like 250 plus 250 equals 100. Sorry, 250. No, it doesn't. 250. Let's try this again.
Keep that in.
250 plus 250 equals 500. Harper also adds 100% gross leverage. Now, the term leverage gets thrown around all over the place all the time. And it's interesting because when you're talking about leverage in the context of like a leverage buyout, you don't talk about it in the same term. So in the hedge fund world, when you're talking like equity long short and all of that, gross leverage is basically just calculated as the absolute value of a total amount long plus short over the net asset value, where the net asset value is the money that has been contributed to the fund. So in this case, my assumption is that they're basically taking a $500 million bet. There's $250 million of assets in the fund. So that is where you get actually, wouldn't that be 200 leverage?
They're levered 2 to 1 is the way I think about it.
Yeah, they're levered 2 to, yeah, exactly. But
that's how you'd actually talk about it, at least in the macro hedge fund world. Like you'd be like, they're levered 2 to 1. Like for every dollar they have in cash, they are putting 2 to work.
Exactly.
Because they borrowed that money from their prime broker, Deutsche Bank.
Yes. But I think that it's also important to think about just the mechanics here, because when you are doing this short, you are going to the broker. They are finding these shares. They are then selling it for you. By the way, you then get cash right away. So they have to put money though into this margin account because by the way, the cash that came in is restricted. They can't actually touch that. That is going to sit in a little fund. It is non-spendable, but they also have to put in cash as well, collateral, because when the position moves, again, they've shorted this, they need to go out and buy. So if the market all of a sudden goes higher, they now owe money. And so this margin account is there to make sure that the bank isn't going to have a problem where they're like, hey guys, you owe us a ton of money. I want to make sure that you're going to be able to pay it and not just like blow up and walk away. And so that is why we had heard previously, Eric said, if the share price goes any higher, we're going to have margin calls. Like you're going to have to actually go out and start buying it because you need to be able to pay that back. So that's a really important point. We had talked previously last episode about this idea of first loss, meaning who is on the hook when things go bad. And it's interesting. My husband does watch the show, so I watch it with him after it's aired. So he is giving me his reaction. He works as a hedge fund marketer, which is very relevant this season. He was like, first of all, I mean, no one invests in short only funds. If you are an allocator, you're not investing for alpha. Like you're investing because this is a hedge to your portfolio. And on top of that, never in a million years would you do a first loss for a short only fund. You can have these first loss arrangements, but typically they're only going to be with market neutral funds. He was like, dude, they should be pitching themselves as market neutral for the alpha opportunity is the shorts. If you wanted to get money, you could pitch this in such a better way than being like, we're only short and we're not going to try to be more market neutral with, again, alpha opportunities in the negative zero. So like,
but also the thing with first loss funds is that because the person running the fund is absorbing more of the downside, then they also have higher economics on the upside. So that's the trade-off. You're protecting your institutional investors and saying, hey, listen, this thing goes wrong, it's on me, okay? I'll take the first hit. But by the way, when it goes right, I benefit more than you do.
Yeah. So we actually have a friend who works at one and they do first loss, but then they get like 50% of the upside. So the economics are quite different, but it's usually those market neutral funds where like you can eke out a return and start to almost like absorb. Like there is just no world in which anyone would be stupid enough to do something like this with a short only fund. I mean, this is the other thing. It's funny, right? You think about just like the market. We've talked about before how we got so scarred by starting our careers literally 2007, 2008, watching. I mean, Jen was on the trading floor at Lehman when it went down. I was working in CDOs. I have been like always waiting for the market to reverse. And the reality is like the market tends to go up. And we've talked about this before, that you do tend to see innovation and things being created. I saw this crazy stat that if you had bought at the absolute peak of the dot-com bubble, by today, you are still up 8% on an annualized basis. So like short only, that's why someone said like you're giving up before you've even started. It is
but
so
I think,
risky.
you know, to the point of the show and why they made this creative decision, Harper is all about blowing up the status quo.
Yeah.
And it's why narratively they have her short being Yasmin's fund. Yasmin represents, in one of our comments, someone pointed this out so accurately. Yasmin represents the status quo, the establishment, that markets always go up because capitalism works and blah, blah, blah. And Harper wants to destroy all of that. And just like we've seen her destroy all these other things. And that's her edge always. And she is so smart, but like, in doing so, she blows herself up.
But the funny thing is like she literally in the first season was like, I wrote a 18-page paper on the defense of capitalism. So it's not that she wants to blow it up because she's anti-capitalistic. She's just like, I want to use the system to make money for myself, you know?
Yes.
So it's not that she's trying to...
I don't think that she has anti-capitalist impulses, although I think this episode has anti-capitalist impulses. I think that it's part of the bigger narrative picture. I think that she wants to use the system to blow up the system, meaning the system being Yasmin.
And monetize it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. For her own gain, for her own edge and satisfaction. So I agree. I don't think that she is anti-capitalist, but in order to be short, you almost have to be anti-capitalist in the sense, because there's that rule that you just said that markets always go up. So why wouldn't you just be market neutral or whatever?
No, but I think that's a good point. I love that take. But I will say, I think that, and she said this in the last season, there is this argument that you need short sellers to correct. Like when you have an economy where the biggest banks, the biggest companies just keep getting bailed out and things just keep going up, then there's no opportunities for almost like your little guy to actually get in, right? We live in this world where like housing prices keep going up. So nobody can fucking afford them. You almost need a correction. They're painful and they suck, but they're also like good for the younger generation and for people who want to build wealth.
The bloodletting you're talking about that.
Which they
Lord
talk.
Morton gets to. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I definitely think there's that. I don't know to what extent Harper believes in the social function of short sellers as being like a stabilizing force, rather than that being a philosophical argument for why they serve a purpose, which I do agree with on a personal level. Like, hey, you got to keep prices in line. I believe in a free market and in finding the right price for something. And if everyone's just a buyer, how can you find the right price?
Which is what we're seeing with all these passive investors. So
I totally agree with you philosophically. I don't think that was Harper's rationale for becoming a short seller.
The other thing is, like we have said before, we're not entirely sure what they have done that is wrong. But at the end of the day, like at this point, it almost doesn't matter if they have. They need to go down because she has this trade on. And I think that that's where it becomes obviously very dangerous, that you could have something that is actually legit, that people are trying to do good and create and innovate. And then you can have short sellers who, for their own personal gain, are trying to make money off of that. So that's sort of the perspective I think that like your Whitney is positioning that they're coming from. Now, whether or not they're doing things wrong, we suspect they probably are. But actually, I think it'd be more interesting if they weren't, if they're not doing anything wrong. And it doesn't matter because Harper's going to tear them all down because that's how she makes money. So I think that that's almost like the more interesting. Anyway, so we'll see. I have no idea where this are going with this. But back to the tender offices. So we have Whitney, Ferdinand, and Wilhelmina's back. So remember, she was the CFO last season, and she is now CEO of All Mirage Pierpoint. So she walks in and she says that they're excited about this new like tender app. And Whitney says, I always thought the copy should be tender powered by Pierpoint, not Pierpoint powered by tender. Wilhelmina says our lawyers went back and forth. So clearly this was a point of contention. She says, we have the investment managers, we have the customer base. That's baked in for you in this exchange, essentially getting more retail customers. And Ferdinand says, we are the more valuable asset. You are a digital dinosaur. We are the future. And Wilhelmina's like, why am I here negotiating something that I assumed was already negotiated? And Whitney says, we want to show you how amenable we have been because we basically want another $1 billion investment. And then it goes back to the product meeting. So it sounds like clearly they're in bed with Pierpoint and now they're trying to get
They want to be deeper in bed.
Yes. So for anyone who's disappointed that Pierpoint was gone, nope, apparently they're back. All Mirage Pierpoint.
They're back.
We then go back to the product meeting where Yaz is trying to orchestrate a big feature event, putting Henry front and center. She says, we want to lead into the tech side of fintech, a buzzy launch. They call it like eventizing. And the Robin dude is like, you want to get like Charlie XCX to come out and do some big thing
He says what? Like Charlie XCX expounding on the virtues of a digitized spending report. And Yaz is like, yes, great idea. Like we should do that. He was just being sarcastic, being like, what's the most ridiculous thing I could suggest? But it's so funny, by the way, because this is exactly what happens in the social media world. We get approached by people who are launching things who are like, hey, I've got a random app. I've got a stock fund, whatever it is. Like, I want you to talk about it on social media and like create buzz and stuff like that. So this is exactly what's happening. This is not like some fantasy. Yaz is like, no, I'm plugged into what actually works in the current day and age.
I mean, I do think she doesn't have bad ideas. I actually think she's being very smart here.
She's media savvy. She is the heiress to Lord Norton's impetus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So she says, yes, a public launch with translation to socials, it's still achievable. So we then go back to Stern Tao, and Sweepy says, it might be smart to de-risk a little bit ahead of this tender rollout because the street is expecting the stock to rally. And Harper says, we can't just start throwing around longs, meaning, right, in the world of buying, you have long, meaning you're buying, short, meaning you're selling. So they would de-risk by going back out and buying some back. So Harper says, then we'd be like any other run-of-the-mill long short, which is, again, classic strategy, equity long short. By the way, fun fact, this is like kind of exciting, but apparently hedge funds are back. Hedge funds were like out of favor forever. And now this year is the year of the hedge fund because 2025, they did great. So anyway.
I don't know if you'll remember when we went to iConnections last January, that was exactly what we were saying last January too. And they were back. They were back last year. Do you remember that? It was like, this is the 80s all over again. Hedge funds are back.
And they did. They put up, like, for the most part, great returns.
Because when there's volatility creates opportunity.
Yep.
Whereas if you think about it, private equity firms, which had been ruling the roost, if you will, for 15 years, they're inherently like a short vol exercise, right? Because you're not market to market, all these things. So it's okay. Are you long volatility implicitly, which I would argue you are?
Well, by the way,
hedge fund?
The best performing fund, convertible ARB last year. And that is fundamentally a volatility play. Like they are essentially trying to monetize the volatility. So anyway, So Kwabena then says, what if Diker's article is just as much of a dud as his last one? And Harper says, that's not going to be the case with the Sunderland piece. Sweepy says, when is that coming? Also lets it be known that she is speaking to the former CEO, Joda Atterbury, which I'm so happy he's back. She says she's softening him up. She hasn't talked business yet. And Harper's like, oh, is he saying anything? And she goes, he is replying, which makes me believe that she's using her OnlyFans persona to
correct. That
get
was
in
my
with him.
presumption as well.
All right, so I'm going to read this line for line. Jen just went and got a prop, but here we go. So we're back at Tender's office. Remember, in last season, we had essentially Pierpoint as Lehman Brothers, essentially. They got bought by Al Mirage, which is a sovereign wealth fund out of the Middle East. They are now Al Mirage Pierpoint, and we have the former CFO, Wilhelmina, who is now CEO. And Whitney says, you know, it's an open secret that Al Mirage is divesting Pierpoint back to the market. Pierpoint is a fucking legacy name. It is sun-bleached font on signage. Gym bags on eBay. And I was all disappointed because I was like, Jen, did you find your Lehman bag? I couldn't even find my Morgan Stanley bag.
I have one.
The banker bag.
I couldn't find it.
Iconic FinCore, tombstones for a once great thing now dead. So Jen, what is your...
So, I mean, I love these lines so much. This is a Lehman Brothers stock certificate. Like, these are framed things that people are selling. If you have a Lehman hat or whatever, you can sell it on eBay. But the most meta thing is they are selling Stern Towel merch for the show, which I desperately want. I want a Stern Towel hat.
Oh,
like,
we need one.
This is a whole, exactly.
Yeah.
But like, this is a whole meta moment of like, life imitates art, imitates life. You know, people do get so nostalgic about this like old, whatever, Lehman and Bear stuff. But also like, I share a similar affection for Stern Towel and I really want a hat.
Same. So Ferdinand says, we are modernity knocking at your door, offering you a leg up. Whitney says, and all we're asking for is a pittance. And Wilhelmina smiles like, okay, we will entertain this.
Yeah. Sounds like she's considering it.
Yep. All right. So from here, we bounce over to that other meeting with Henry, who says, when does the press release go out and to who? Robin, remember, current marketing exec, he says tabled for 1 p.m. PST on Thursday. Now, this is totally random, but I will say I did notice like they give exact times so frequently for things. And this is just like, we'll have to like see the whole episode and like totally me reading into like stuff that I probably like should not. But it is interesting. I do wonder if like there's anything coded with some of the times because it'll be like your 3 p.m. is here, your 3 p.m. is here, your 9 a.m. is here, your 3 p.m. is here. Like it's always.
Is there like signals in the numbers? Oh,
I don't know.
It's
like
good.
beautiful mind. Either that or I'm like going way too down the rabbit hole. But I do think time might be somehow in something. Somebody commented how even with the second episode, the commander, when like Henry looks around and then he looks back and like Whitney's there, it's like your 2 p.m. is here. And then it's just like, oh, he's already dressed. So I don't know. Or Africa, he's always going for 24 hours.
I think they make such a point of that specifically because it's so insane to go to Africa for 24 hours. Like to show how crazy it is that Whitney's doing that.
Agreed. I agree with that. There's not any other shows I've seen where it's so specific, like you're 1 p.m., you're 3 p.m., you're whatever. So who knows? This is just us throwing spaghetti at the wall. And then if it sticks, great. And if we're totally off, we were doing our best. But so Robin says, in terms of like, oh, this is great, like where they're going to be going out. So Robin has the traditional ideas. He's like usual channels, TechCrunch, Wired, Breaking Banks podcast, which I looked up apparently as a fintech podcast.
Not me being devastated that they didn't mention the Wall Street Skinny. Where's your Wall Street Skinny interview for your big app launch? Hello.
Seriously. And Yaz says, I think we should feature Henry on more lifestyle podcasts. And Robin just goes, there should be a tariff on podcast equipment. And so they were clearly making a commentary.
But again, she's right. What would be done for something like that? You'd have them on Joe Rogan. You'd have them on whatever, not skinny but not fat, like with Amanda Hirsch being like, hey, new app, like blah, 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 doing some song trend. You know?
Yeah. But the main point here is we also can see there is this standoff between Yaz, who wants to do what I think are just like better ideas for an app. She understands the new age. Like Robin is this slightly older white guy, legacy, traditional. And actually Whitney later even says, you're a little too trad for us. Like he is. Yep. He's a little too traditional for what they're ultimately trying to do. And they're setting up this match, if you will. So from here we go back to Whitney, who is on his phone in his office, and he is zooming in on a picture of Jim and Harper. Now, I don't ever remember a actual scene where they were talking together live in person. Am I just like blanking out on that?
No, I mean, obviously time has passed, right? But now we've gotten to the point where there is someone who's spying on Jim. We know now that it's not all in his head. He is being followed by someone. We just don't know who. And I don't know that we actually get clarity on who is the one taking the pictures in this case, because those pictures are being delivered to Whitney, not to Harper. But now we know that Whitney knows about Jim and Harper. He obviously knows who Jim is. He obviously knows who Harper is because he has slept with Harper, which is like easy to forget at this point.
With the strap on in episode 1. Anyway, so Yaz walks in and she says, Henry isn't happy about how the app launch is being positioned. Clearly it is her, and she's using Henry as her way to say like, So Whitney says, because your husband hasn't landed on something he likes. Robin says you want to eventize the launch. Then they go back and they kind of go back and forth about how like the word eventize is so like stupid. But Yaz says, if I had a proper job title, a role in the comms department, this would have all been done properly. And Whitney says, you want to report under Robin? And she says, I want to give Henry a pulpit. But you can see that, look, this is all for her. Like she is doing this for herself. Henry is just the vehicle through which she is able to do what she wants.
I'm actually surprised to hear you say that because I think that like you had made the point that she actually does care about Henry and does want what's best for him. And I actually don't think that she doesn't want what's best for Henry, but it's I know best. It's like mother knows best, if you will, which we'll get to. And she's mothering Henry still like he doesn't know what's best for him. So I'm going to do what's best. And it happens to also be with her advancement being key to that. I loved your Rebecca Newman comparison in our last episode because here she is. She doesn't have a formal title within the company and she needs one in order to legitimize everything that she's doing because she's going to hit a wall otherwise at this point.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting because in episode 2, I did believe that she loved him and I believed that she wanted what was best for him and everything. But then it's like after episode 3 where she was doing that weird stuff, putting him in this highly compromised position. And I'm like, what are you doing? And someone suggested, is she trying to like nullify the prenup? I don't know. Episode 2, I was fully on board. I was like, she loves him. And now I feel like she's just using him. I mean, we obviously don't know.
But that's Yaz's way. Like Yaz's version of love is being a dominatrix and exerting her will over men.
This is true.
So I think this is totally consistent.
Yeah, this is true. Whitney says, if Henry wants to be prominent, if he wants to be responsible for this, I'm not going to get in his way. But I was disappointed in him. I thought I was hiring a rock star. Which, by the way, like how? You met him and he was like coked out of his mind and like being insane. So I'm not sure why you thought you were hiring a rock star.
That's coming out of Whitney's mouth here.
Yeah, he says, and he was a fucking ghost in her meeting with the PRA. That was the regulator in the last episode. But then Yaz asks, is there a potential role for Hayley within the company? But it's interesting that she's asking for this before possible ramifications from last episode. I thought it was interesting that she asks now and not later.
I think this is Yasmin consolidating power. I think the two go hand in hand. So I think she's asking for the job for herself and she's asking for the job for Hayley so that she can exert her sphere of influence within the company. And she's starting with what she knows. She can control Henry. She thinks she's pulling the strings on Hayley as well. So she wants Hayley in a position because right now, remember, the groundwork was set that she is Henry and Whitney's executive assistant.
Such a good
not
point.
Her.
Oh yeah.
So all of a sudden,
really
if Yasmin is the one arguing for what her career path should be, then she can consolidate power with Hayley rolling up to her.
Good point. Now, I also thought this was interesting. Whitney leans back in his chair and smiles a little bit and says, "What do you see in her?" So I wonder if he freaking bugged there because he then says some other stuff, which you're like, Did he have their freaking room bugged?
He 100% fucking knows.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So okay. So you agree with my assessment?
Yes.
And they are not
I don't think
subtle.
it's I don't think it's as glaringly clear right now as it becomes momentarily.
Yeah. So leans back in his chair and Yaz says, I think she may have some information that could help us with the Steiger guide, but she needs some sweetening. And Whitney says, bright young things attract bright young things. Speaking of, when was the last time you spoke to your friend Harper? Anyway, so they start talking about that. And
well, no, I think it's actually really important that he says this because I think he's trying to understand how much Yasmin knows. Meaning, okay, you want Hayley part of your consolidation of power. Is Harper part of that consolidation of power? Is she part of your power?
Well, also, is she? Could Yaz be working for Harper in some
100%.
capacity too?
Is she? 100%. So he's trying to suss out how much Yaz does or doesn't know about who Harper really is and what she is doing.
Yeah.
This is a very important scene for establishing where he is going to ultimately come down on Yasmin's role within the organization and within.
Fair. Yeah. So he says, you guys still close. Yaz looks confused and says, why? And Whitney says, I have a suspicion that her venture's short. And Yasmin just smiles knowingly because she's like, of course she would screw me like this. This is so unsurprising. And she says she's probably being spurred on by her former boss, Eric. They're a poisonous double act.
Yasmin's former boss, by the way.
She says they're a poisonous double act. They liked to enable each other's worst instincts because they're fucking insecure. I can think of some comms angle to deal with this. And then Whitney says, great.
But as she's saying these lines, I think what it sounds like at face value, she's saying, you know what? It's not really Harper. It's like Eric. It's almost like she's trying to rationalize to herself, like, again, Harper's done this to me again. Like, okay, I'll go do this to her. I don't think she thinks that there's a there, if you will, to use Eric's words. I think that she's like, fucking Harper. Of course she'd be short us. She's going to do her thing. First opening salvo comes from Harper. She's short my company. I'll then go counter-strike effectively.
Yep. All right. So from here, we then are in this like underneath a bridge,
Underpass,
you see a car, and some finance bro like runs into the car, and then you see Rishi and some other woman. The finance bro dude like asks to buy some drugs. It goes back to last episode where they had a dig at Deutsche Bank, who by the way apparently is now in the news for some money laundering probe.
Today, which just so you guys know, when Kristen posted that meme of the dig against Kenny for working at Deutsche Bank, we got some actually British comments being like, but Deutsche Bank is so great at FX. Wasn't Kenny in FX? Like, I don't understand. Deutsche Bank is superior to Goldman in FX. And the Bloomberg review of last week's episode was the closing line of that Bloomberg review was Harper's going to place a short obtained by sketchy means. Who better to go to than Deutsche Bank? Implying that like this is a German bank with a long history of money laundering issues. And it's true. Like, not that all banks don't have these issues, by the way. So like, I'm not trying to hate on Deutsche Bank here, but it is just funny that people like rushed to Deutsche Bank's defense. And then today they are in the news for a money laundering scandal.
Yeah. But also, I mean, the title of the last episode was German. It is interesting that then they also pick like a German bank. So like, I don't think that any of this was
I don't think that's
coincidental.
And as you may recall, if you have been following my like weird rabbit hole thing, my belief is that what they are trying to position Tender as is Wirecard, which was the biggest fintech scandal in possibly like in history and was a German company. And so that's why I think there are so many German roots. That's why we have the Austrian bank. That's why we have all these things, because we are trying to evoke Wirecard. And we do have a very thoughtful German follower who has been like spurring me on, being like, I love this. I bet you know this. Who like also has a history in like espionage. So like, anyways, this is really cool. Yeah.
So the point though is that they made this dig at Deutsche Bank, and then they make another dig. So Rishi says, he says, you can't be front office. And so in the world of finance, you have front office, middle office, back office, but basically you can't be like a banker, a salesperson, whatever. You can't be a finance bro, you know, with money at risk, making like the big bucks. You can't be in front office with a pinstripe that chalky unless you're a Pavo Dive, which I had to look up, a cheap, shabby place like Royal Bank of Scotland. So they just are like one like comment after the next, just like digging at all the banks. Like
it's seriously like something pulled straight off a Wall Street Oasis chat board. Like, no one talks like this.
No, that's also true. So the girl, there's this woman next to him who clearly wants some of the drugs. She's going down on him as she then gets a call from...
As he's filming her.
Yes.
So Rishi is filming her on his phone. So there's this pornographic angle to what's happening here. So what does he intend to do with this footage? Is this how he is experiencing life from a distance? Meaning, I'm not even a participant in this act. I'm not really there. I'm so distanced from it. I'm totally dissociating from it. The only value is having it filmed. Or is he actually like using this and distributing it as pornography, by the way, probably without this woman's consent? So there's two questions that you have when you're watching this. And the implication is that he's become so desensitized to reality that the only way that there is pleasure in this sex act is for him to be filming it and participating in it by viewing that.
Right.
And so it's really crazy. While all this is going on, there is this music blasting, and it's this song about yearning, about like, I would give all my tomorrows just to hold you again, which is so discordant with what's actually going on here.
Well, and she does keep calling him daddy and poppy, which is, and then Rishi then gets a call from Diana's mom, Mary, who says...
he has in his phone saved as cow-in-law.
Oh, really? I missed that part. But so as
his mother-in-law who's calling.
Yeah. And as he gets this phone, he just is like, wait, get off of me. Like he shoves the woman aside. Like his number one thing is he has clearly like, this is all he wants. And so he is so eager to pick up the phone. He's like, hi, hello, Mary. And he says he wasn't expecting to hear from her. She says, I hope you're well. He says, as well as I guess I could be. And Mary says, we thought we'd make arrangements for you to see Hugo, remember his son. It was important we got a few things in order. And Risha's like, you don't owe me an apology. He's trying to be so deferential to her.
Yes.
And she says, this isn't an apology. And he's like, of course. She says that they'll make arrangements so that he can see his son. And he's just like, wherever. Like she says she'll send through the details. But he then says to the woman, like drug addicty person, they took my kid away from me. She says, maybe they've got their reasons. And he says, maybe shut the fuck up. But the thing is, like, you can see that the one thing he wants is to be with his son. That's all he wants.
Yes. And I will reiterate that this whole scene, this music is playing uncomfortably loudly. Like, this isn't background music. It was so loud, and he turns it down to take the call with his mother-in-law, but it is still uncomfortably loud for background music in a scene. It is like a third actor in the scene, this song about yearning.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We both said that this whole episode was so
painful,
not pleasant. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the discordant music in the scenes that we didn't like. And then that's obviously going to come back at the end as well.
Correct.
But that was so
it's incredibly uncomfortable. Yep.
Yes. All right. So from here, we then go back to the tender offices, and Yaz asks Whitney, do you know the Web Horizon guys? Whitney says, they asked Jonah and I to attend a bunch of times, but we passed because we thought that if we both shared the stage, it would be a stock negative event, given we did not see eye to eye in the future of the company. Yaz says it might be a
Web
little bit.
Horizon, I don't think is a real conference. I think it's supposed to be an analog for Web Summit, which is one of the biggest and oldest tech conferences. Again, not something I'm familiar with, something I looked up. If you guys think it's based on something else, please let us know.
But anyway, so Yasmin says might be a little bit late for them to accommodate us, but they're going to float that the business secretary, so Lisa Dern is apparently coming to attend. That's how much they've gotten the freaking government on board with this stuff to help combat some of the negative press that's coming out of FinDigest. Has FinDigest responded to legal? Whitney says that piece was so undercooked. And this goes back to what you had talked about, like Herbalife. He says that piece was so undercooked, it undermined whatever point they were trying to make. But Louisa says they're doubling down. And so Yaz says, I'm going to speak with Percy at Norton's Newspapers. He's the business editor of the Sunday paper. And Whitney says, Robin's on board. And Yaz says, he will be. And then Whitney says, fuck yeah, I've got a 3 p.m. to Accra. I'll be back soon. 24 hours. So that's why I'm like, they're constantly, it's always the exact time of all these different things. And maybe there is no reason, it's just their format, but whatever. Okay. So Yaz then says, to your point, that's such a long way for such a short trip. Whitney says to Hayley,
he snaps his fingers at her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you would at a dog.
Yeah. He says, assist Yaz with whatever she needs for the launch. And Yaz says, you don't need her in Ghana. And Whitney says she's supposed to split the load with Henry. So let her take half of his load off of you, which is.
Well, and he looks at her very knowingly when he says half of his load and looks at her. Load is synonym for something.
Yeah.
So it is. And he says it and his voice goes up at the end. So he says off of you. And it's implying a question, but it's implying that he knows exactly what's going on with the three of them. There is no question in my mind that he knows about the threesome at this point.
Well, this also reminds me of last season where you had Otto Mostyn take Harper to this nowhere pond as he's killing a fish or something. And it's very sinister. And we're like, oh my God, is she going to die? Are they going to kill her? But he's like, I have ways of making things very painful for you. Not like I'm going to murder you Godfather style, but I have ways of making your life miserable. And I feel like Whitney has that exact same energy. So we had talked about, is he American Psycho? Like, I don't think he's like murdering people. I mean, maybe he is, but I mean, obviously like there was the whole cremation angle from the funeral.
I have no idea. It's very sinister.
But the compromise, like he knows everything that is going on with all these people.
Correct.
But also like, yeah.
The question is what will he do with that information?
All right. So next scene, Sweet Pea calls Jonah. He's at a strip club alone, by the way, just like watching some woman. When she calls him, he says, normally chicks want some kind of payment before getting personal so fast. So clearly this was, whether it was like the OnlyFans siren thing, this was her using the platform to be like, pay me.
Yeah, I don't know how it works. Like, cause I've seen so many articles about like men use these things just for feelings of companionship. Like they just want these women to talk to them. And so like, I imagine the fee for getting a phone call is much higher than the fee for like a text. Again, I don't know, but I do want to say, so you had mentioned in our previous episode that you had this theory that people are positioned in a nod to their roles in other movies. So I was like, maybe, like, I think that there's like potential meat on that bone. But then I was like, what would it be for Cal Penn? Like Harold and Kumar? And then I was like, yes, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle is about a bunch of pot smokers looking for a burger. And in the first episode, he's portrayed as this like frat boy constantly getting high in his office. So I was like, oh, I guess Kristen Siri like does hold.
Dude.
So I wanted to shout out to you that like maybe there is something there about that. And then there's something else at the end that may be way too far of a leap, but we'll see.
So as she's having this conversation with him, she picks up a cufflink that looks a little bit like a pitchfork. I don't know if you had.
No, it's Eric's old squid.
Oh, do you want to explain to people like what that means? There was the giant squid episode from like season 2.
That's the Jesse Bloom episode. I forget who gave Eric the cufflinks. It was Adler.
It was Adler. Interesting.
Yes, it was Adler.
Okay. Interesting. So Sweet Pea is picking up the squid cufflinks and literally just looking at it. We don't necessarily know what this means, but she and like maybe Jen does.
I do wonder, the giant squid, it's funny because those cufflinks in the meaning that they took on in episode 1 of season 3 was very different than the giant squid who was Jesse Bloom in season 2. And the giant squid was like the big client, like the big fish, the white whale that Harper wanted to catch with Jesse Bloom. But also remember, it was his short of fast aid that was like the critical position. So I do think of where my mind went was, is Jonah the giant squid? Like, is he the key to unlocking this big short in this episode? That's all. Like, is he going to have the missing link to the information that they need? So like him being in a strip club, I think is interesting when we get into our whole conversation about pornography. But I also felt, to me, I was like, okay, so there's no sex in this episode. So this was like the HBO quota, like the box that they had to tick. Like, okay, no one's actually having sex. So we're talking about sex a lot. We need to have this take place in a strip club. That was part of me thinking. But it's interesting because like we talked about that Kierkegaardian framework, if you will, for where our characters are in their personal journey. And we talked about that qualitative leap. Jonah has taken the leap from the corporate world to like his basest self, right? He is in that lowest existential state now of being in the purely aesthetic delights, AKA like naked ladies phase of his development. And Sweet Pea calls him and offers him what I feel like is this lifeline out that we'll talk about. Akin to where Rishi was in the car, where he's engaged in this sex act with this woman, and he gets this call from the mother-in-law offering him the lifeline out through the path of reconnecting with his son. So just keep thinking about that again, from the aesthetic to the moral to the religious faith framework that you have to go through on Kierkegaard's journey.
Right. But I will say, just like as a more practical matter, she says, I have a slightly ulterior motive. I work as a research analyst. Believe your former employer is misrepresenting how they make money. He's like, what the fuck? She says, don't hang up. So much of this work is finding nuggets of encouragement. People only open up if their incentive outweighs their incentive to stay silent. Sidebar, he has a ton of equity still in this company that they did not take out per Whitney's instruction in episode 1. So I'm sorry. Yes, he might want to, stab Whitney in the back. But his incentive is 100% not to make this freaking equity go down. Like, he has a lot of net worth tied up in this company.
Yeah, but he keeps saying it's not about the money. I have enough money to not care about anything, blah, blah, blah. So
he has the money in the equity.
In my mind, it wasn't, I don't know if that's where all of his money is. I don't know how much cash he has versus like his ongoing stake in the business. So you're right. Financially, he's not incentivized to take tender down because of his ongoing stake there. But I think everything he tells us in this exchange tells us that he doesn't care about money. He cares about taking Whitney down.
Yeah. And look, he's super drunk and high and stuff. So like, I think people tend to be the most honest when they're in that state. But if he does start to work with them, I would not trust his motivations just because he has significant, it's kind of like, when you think about people, it's like, tell me how people are making their money and I'll tell you what their actions are. I just don't, yes, he has the person. I wouldn't, because if they had said your equity is gone, I thought it was interesting that they made that point in episode 1 that like he still has significant equity in this company and that like none of it's getting taken away.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
That was my reading, is like, why would he help them? He's going to sue the crap out of them, but he doesn't stand to win if it goes to 0. He stands to lose a lot is all.
Well, and the question is then it takes a different framework, that it's not only that if he takes Whitney down, he gets his revenge. He'd also be shooting himself if he takes Whitney down because it's like a suicide.
It's the kamikaze. Yeah. The kamikaze thing. All right. So Sweet Pea then says, I imagine you have a bone to pick with Whitney. Haberstrom, you know, since he fired you. He tells Sweet Pea that he's suing for defamation. He has a lot of emails, like correspondence he was sent, gigabytes worth, he says. And Sweet Pea asked if she could get access to them. And he's like, well, most of it's been redacted. Like anything that is not about me, there's nothing there. But she's like, I'll just ping you my email. And so we find out he does send it to her. By the way, as this is all going down, he's literally walking with a stripper from the strip club into a back room, like getting a private lap dance. And he then also tells her, the more I think about it, the more I see I was blindsided by my history with him. I noticed he checked the stock price like an ECG, so like an electrocardiogram, the last 2 years. Down days he'd mope around, suicide watch, up days he was a prince. This, by the way, so sounds like Henry, the suicide watch prince. They literally called Henry a little prince. He says, me coming to him with a question, leaving with 2 more. Rabidly social, never seemed to fuck. I also never saw him drunk. Clients, investors, auditor. He'd down them in Cristal. He'd leave them butt fucked. By the way, interesting choice of words, given what we just saw with him and Harper, by a hangover and a lobotomy. But they would say, oh boy, that cad from Tender Parties, like a pre-crisis Florida realtor, which goes back to this pre-crisis activity. That was season 1, where we were talking about like pre-2008 financial crisis. It was just gangbusters on Wall Street. So pre-crisis activity, that's what that means. Sweet Pea says, thank you, Jonah. I hope I brought you pleasure in unexpected ways. And Jonah says, if you're going to play me like this, as he's being serviced by the stripper, by the way, do me the courtesy of burying him deep enough so that his kind don't respawn. And Sweet Pea says, I will. But so that is very interesting that we find out that he's been obsessed with the stock price. I mean, because we've never seen him like sad and suicide watch type thing, like very depressed. We've only ever kind of seen him pretty cool, calm, and collected.
Yep.
And I said to you, I was like, it would be so funny. They did the Sixth Sense thing if they did the Fight Club angle where it's like Henry, Muck, and Whitney are the same person, even though we've seen them in all the, interesting. We've seen them in all the same scenes together. So like, I don't think that's where they're going with this, but.
No, but I do think it is American Psycho to a T, which is you see Patrick Bateman engaged in all of the traditional scenes of debauchery. He's always with people who are getting drunk, bearing their souls or whatever. And he is stone cold faced. So like, this is 100% affirming our American Psycho thesis about Whitney, that he is the one who's like champagne for everybody, doesn't take a sip, or like everybody's having sex, he's never asleep. Like, remember we had Jonah just constantly hitting us over the head of like, I've got girls coming out of blah, 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 I'm at the strip club, all this stuff. And Whitney's like, yeah, whatever. But then he uses sex as this interchange with Harper that I think is very interesting. That we have seen Whitney have sex.
Yeah. And one other thing, which is interesting, is the fact that in episode 1, when Jim, the very opening scene, when he went to the club with Hayley and she gave him a pill, he put it in his pocket. He didn't take it, even though then it's like we find out he's like this drug addict. So I thought that that was just a very interesting thing, that he was like staying sober to try to get that information out of her.
Right. The
but
person
that he
who's
was doing
sober
the same
is
thing.
always manipulating everybody else.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, right? Now, whether or not Hayley was in control of her faculties with the pill thing at the beginning, I do think is a constant theme throughout of like who was manipulating whom in that circumstance, because Jim Diker was positioned obviously as like, oh, this is a very ethically wrong thing to do. Why did Hayley go along with it? And she seemed almost like the aggressor when they were back at her house.
Right. All right. So from here, we then go to the next scene. And this is where Henry finds out that Whitney is going to Accra again. And he is just pissed. He says, Guy sold me a fucking dummy, meaning Whitney. I don't want to be a host for another capital markets vulture like Pierpoint. This vision was meant to be utilitarian, not some defibrillator for a zombie bank. Because we know that, obviously, Pierpoint is just like going down. But Yaz says, you still control how it's perceived. Whitney's spoken to Web Horizon about allowing you to make more of a splash. You're going to be on the main conference live stream. I'll make sure it's picked up by all the trades. Is that like the trade magazine versus
like the trades, like all the, okay, we've got like this form of the media, that form of the media, like all the different trade, like.
Yeah. Henry then says, why are the two of you always colluding on what are clearly executive decision? And Yaz is just like, colluding, we're strategizing to try to help you. If you don't see that this is integral to the success of the company, and she goes to say company, and then she says, to your success, like this is the integral to the success of our family. And Henry says, a press release would basically allow us to frame the narrative. I think he just wants to be able to control it better. Like she knows how unstable he is. And she's like, I think you should go out and give a big speech. And he's like, how about we do a press release so that I am not
he's like, this is my worst nightmare. No, I don't want this.
Yep. And Yaz says, Robin's words sound completely dead in your mouth, which again goes back to like do the press release. But she says, look, I get it. You've stood on stages before and you've been embarrassed, because he did this with Lumi. I mean, he was like a visionary. He would go out and talk about how much he believed in it. And I do believe he believed in it.
Remember, he was brought out at the COP conference to have this be like this crowning achievement moment. And he was totally humiliated.
Yeah. And we see him start to get really almost like fed up with her, disenfranchised with her. She goes over to try to be like, come here, like trying to be loving and hugging. And he says, get out. He like pushes her away. He says, not here, back to her trying to be this way in the office. Him being like, not here. She says, what are you afraid of? He says, I don't have it in me to be torn apart again. Do you have any idea how tiring it is for people to constantly be questioning your integrity because you fucked up once? And he then screams, he's like, once. Yaz says, listeners will lean into the belief of the teller, so go tell it. And this to me, and this becomes a theme later with Whitney, but gave such of like the Mad Men vibes where it's like, this is all marketing. This is all telling a story. This is telling a story that someone wants to hear. I mean, they have, right, former Sally Draper, Kiernan Shipka, who is Hayley. And it goes back to this thing of like, they're bringing in characters who I feel like the works of art embody something. It's about like the Mad Men ad like telling your story, marketing campaign, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Henry then leans over his desk and he says, you always make me chase the most egotistical part of myself. Do you know that? She smiles and she goes, well, without it, Henry, nothing would fucking happen. Basically, like you are kind of worthless unless I am pushing you to do all this stuff.
I think it's just, here's the world is how Yasmin sees it. I'm the puppet master. I've got everyone doing my bidding. I am maneuvering Henry. I'm actually kind of maneuvering Whitney. I'm maneuvering Hayley, and I am getting shit done. This is my vision. We're going to have this great app rollout, and it's all going to go according to my plan. She really thinks she's in control here, and she thinks that Henry is definitely the puppet, and she's the puppet master. And I think that we are about to see that her worldview may not be so correct.
Yep. Okay, so next scene, Lord Norton, and I assume it's Percy because we haven't met him, but we know that that's the business editor from the Sunday paper. And they're sitting across the table and they joke, thanks for introducing us to this Hitler-loving Nazi who's now writing articles for us. And Lord Norton says his In Defense of Jus Sanguinis piece was a real poke in the eye, even for me, which means like in defense of the right of blood. It's something to do with like immigration and all that kind of fun stuff.
Well, nationality, right? It's that nationality and citizenship are birthright through blood. And it's actually how citizenship is still determined in many countries, including the U.S., right? If you're born to U.S. citizens, you are a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. But Lord Norton says, I mean, I don't know how he wrote it, but he says it was a real poke in the eye, even for me, for Lord Norton. And Yaz says, as long as people are clicking, that's all that matters. Anyway, so Norton says, your husband was in a product meeting and our tech editor said he is now expecting Henry at Web Horizon. And they start talking about like, well, what do they want to do? Do they want to put out some like big press release about second acts, blah, blah, blah. Robin comes in, says, we'll take any winning highlights you can offer, but there's a strategy with the rollout. Yaz says, I wasn't thinking about a puff piece. I basically want to put out a hit piece on Finn Digest, Jim Diker, Harper, and Eric. Robin, by the way, is pushing back. We have legal taking care of this. Like, let's not do anything that's going to make this more noisy. Yaz says, legal tennis won't show any teeth and it won't stop another article. Robin says, I don't think Whitney agrees with stoking this particular fire. And then Whitney comes on over the speaker. He's calling in from his private jet. And he says, actually, don't speak for me. We should be proactive against anyone trafficking in fake news. So Yasmin explains what's happening with Finn Digest. Norton says, fat cat fund managers, city lawlessness. When are we not telling the story?
Meaning like old news, no one cares. Like there's no teeth on this.
Right. Yaz says, I think there's a unique set of circumstances here. I mean, hamstringing a government-backed success before it runs, benefiting the UK consumer. I mean, there's a public interest angle. Percy says, I think our readers will enjoy hating on the hypocrisy of it all. And Norton says, public shaming of hypocrites is like bloodletting. Makes us feel better about our own hypocrisies. And Robin then asks if they approve. And Whitney's just like, yes, I do. Because Yaz initially is like, and then he's like, yes, I do.
Yeah. So back to this. This is what Otto Mostyn originally got Harper in with, right? It's like, we are going to out the fraudsters to cover up our own frauds. So like that was his whole thesis for why Harper should work for him with a short selling fund. So now we have this totally turned on its head where it's like, hey, we, the people controlling the media who have these nefarious agendas or whatever, we're going to point out the hypocrisy of the people pointing out the fraudsters. So it's like the freaking onion of fraudsters on fraudsters on fraud. It's fraud all the way down, right? Turtles all the way down. So I just think it's really interesting that we got here, but also so true, by the way, because does anyone love anything better than the virtue signaling? This is like the Blake Lively thing. I mean, regardless of who, and I truly don't know, I'm not an attorney, but I think people are really loving the fall from grace from this Hollywood darling who was coming out on the standpoint of like moral outrage and blah, 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 blah. And people are like, no, you're really a hypocrite. And that's why people are enjoying, to your point, the schadenfreude of taking her down. This is that, but for Harper.
Yeah. So
and not really Harper so much, but Finn Digest and Ed, the editor, like they couldn't come up with a different name.
Well, they said this like Ed Burgess dude was a super like
sanctimonious, whatever.
Yeah.
If you're sanctimonious in industry, you're not going to last long.
No, no, you've got to have a little bit of like an edge. So Robin asks if they have proof, and Whitney's like, yes, I do, because he's been following people and probably bugging people. He says that he will send the photos to Norton, and Norton says, let us sidebar and decide the shape and how alarmist we want to go with the presentation. He then leans over, kisses Yasmin, and as Norton leaves, you hear the voice of Whitney say to Yasmin, stay on the line, Robin, you can go. So as Robin walks out, Yasmin smiles, and Whitney asks if he's off. She says yes. And Whitney says that Robin's not aggressive enough, which we've seen. Yes says, yeah, he's a little bitch. Sorry. And then she asks, what proof do you have for Norton? And Whitney says, I have photographic evidence. They'll send it to her. He says, Harper Co., whatever they're calling themselves, they don't have the capital to touch us. He then licks his lips, kind of like in that predatory way, like we've seen Yasmin do before. And Yaz says, I'm going to invite her in. She needs to see the scale of things so she knows how much she's bound to lose if she plays in the dirt. Whitney says, do you think she's short because of Diker? And Yaz says, morality might as well be fucking Latin to her. Because she doesn't. We know that Harper does not. Well, I will say, Harper historically, seasons 1 to 3, has had no morals. I have felt like in this new season, she's had a little bit more, but also we don't know.
Well, I think what's interesting here is we're seeing the evolution of Yasmin and her feelings towards Harper, because it was one thing to be like, rumors, you know, like, okay, you strike first, I strike next. But she didn't know that he had proof. She was like, oh, he thinks she's short, whatever it is. Now that she knows he has proof, it's no longer just fun and games for Yasmin. Now she seems truly hurt. And now she's like, okay, this isn't just like Harper being Harper. This is like, wow. Okay, so she is really stabbing me in the back again.
Right.
Although if you'll recall, last time they were together, the only interaction that they've had was them getting in a fight when they were together doing coke on the couch. And Yasmin was like, you're so fucking lonely. And Harper was like, yeah, I am, like whatever. So Yasmin actually drew first blood in this latest feud. We can't forget that like Harper does have a bone to pick with Yasmin from their most recent encounter, because the two can't be normal people and talk to each other like friends.
Right. All right. So next scene, now we're with Rishi, and he is with Mary, and he's like watching his son play. So he's in this chaperone visitation type thing. And he asks Mary, does he know who I am? Mary, remember, Di's mom, she doesn't reply. And she says, we haven't been to our house in Biarritz for a while. It's hard to go given how much time we spent there, but we're worried it's falling into disrepair. We need to visit soon. She then slides a document over to him, and he looks at it and he says, Hugo Smith. Clearly they're looking to change his name. She says that would be his surname on his new passport so we can take him abroad. I don't know why they would need to change his surname, but that's fine.
What's happening here is they're taking him away.
Yes, but there's no reason that he should have to change his last name, because parents can travel with kids who have different last names. Like I said, it is so common these days for a mom to not take their husband's last name and then have a different last name from their child. I have that situation. Now, if I were to travel, I would need to have documentation that shows like how I am related to my kids, only internationally, because it depends on the country, depends on all that stuff. If they're legal guardians, you just need the freaking like paperwork that shows that. They wouldn't necessarily have to change their name. And so I think that that is kind of such a dig and not necessary. Like you don't need that for the passport just to travel with. So I want to make that point. Like this is such a extra step. That is unnecessary, that I think is like especially hurtful. Mary says, yeah, this is so we can take him abroad, like not permanently, of course, just on holiday. And if you sign on the name change, we can look into setting some further visitation. You then hear Hugo say, I made some tea for mommy, which is like so heartbreaking.
So heartbreaking.
So Rishi then asks, will I ever get to be alone with him? And she says, I don't think that would be a good idea. You don't get to set any terms, I'm afraid. And Rishi's like, yeah, almost like realizing, of course, he shouldn't be alone with him, that he's in the wrong and everything. And so he then just signs. But I will say, we find out later that someone else was convicted of the crime of murdering Diana. We obviously don't know what exactly he has said. If he told them about the gambling problem, if he told them what happened, I'm guessing that must have been it, because if they believe that somebody else, like, why would he have this happen? You know? So I think he told them the truth.
I don't know is the answer. And we can talk about this later, but like, I think they know that he is in one way or another responsible for her death. I don't think he was like, I had a gambling problem and my bookie came in and.
But also maybe because he might have told them, because the parents could have paid off his debts. I mean, you had said like, what happened to the debts? I don't think it would be inconceivable that when this happened, he went to the parents and said, I was in a super dark hole. I owed $500,000. They're still after me. They just did this to like my wife. They killed her. And now I'm worried for my son's life, and they paid off the debts. Like, I almost think that's why this happened. But then I also don't know why they would be, because we also find out that then they're going after this other person for like manslaughter and stuff. And they're trying to get the charges up. So I don't know why they would be like trying to put an innocent person away. So I don't know.
I think
it's
they
like
have
we
framed someone else for his death, but I do think that they suspect in some way, shape, or form that Rishi is to blame. And I just don't know how much they know about Rishi's problems. But they knew also that they were separated, remember? So like they separated long before she was murdered. And I'm sure that her parents knew, hey, we're separated. We parted ways because he has this gambling disease. And I think they blame him for her death in that, like, had you not been, I think they do know he was a gambling addict. I don't know that they paid off his debt, but I think they don't think he's a good guy and they don't want him anywhere near his son. But I don't think they know everything.
Right. But they know that he didn't murder her the way that Sweet Pea thinks.
Correct. They clearly do hold him responsible to some extent.
Yeah. So the mom then says, Hugo will grow up in a house of love. I promise you. Risha says, I appreciate you being civil with me. And Di's mom says, Rishi, any anger I feel towards you is dwarfed by the scale of my faith in God. Every choice you made denies it, but even a man like you does not stand outside his grace. And then he looks just completely like he's given up. He just says, yeah. And then he looks over at his son again. And so
this is a really interesting scene in a show that has otherwise never referenced anything religious, which makes me, again, think we're 100% on track with this Kierkegaard reference from the beginning. Yeah. She has made that leap of faith where like everything that her freedom from like the burden of her daughter's death is because she has completely parted ways with everything that's like logic and reasonable. She should be super angry at this guy. And she is taking out her frustration with him or her anger at him or whatever by being like, you know what? You're never seeing this kid again, right? It's very clear from this scene that Rishi will never see Hugo again.
Oh, I didn't get that at all. I thought she said we'll talk about further visitation rights. And I thought that's why the end was so...
Of you sign away his name, we're taking him out of the country, and you're never seeing this kid again.
Oh, no. So I didn't get that. I got more that there was the potential for him to see more, which I think also makes kind of what happens later even more tragic. Like I thought there was still open.
I think the reason what happens later is because he knows he's never seeing his son again. And he is coming to grips with that his fate is sealed. Just the way he reacts in this scene, everything he says is him coming to grips with the fact that they have taken him away. They dangled this thing that he could maybe have a path to seeing them if he just signs this document. And then now
I trust the mom. I think the window is still open. And she's being civil with him. She's talking about this belief in a higher power and you don't stand outside God's grace. Like we're going to talk about visitation.
But the way he reacts is totally defeated.
It is. But I mean, he's literally just signed his son now no longer has his name. I think he thought he would see him again, but this was confirmation that like, he's not the dad anymore. And it's almost like back to the woman making that statement to Jim in the beginning, like nobody knows you exist. And it's that same kind of thing. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But from here, we then go and we see they're setting up for this Web Horizons conference. They're walking through this back hallway and you see Yaz, Hayley's running after her. And Hayley tells Yaz that the Fin Digest journalist is in the audience. And Yaz is like, let him watch. Actually, unless it's making you uncomfortable. And Hayley says, no. It's not And then she very purposely says him, meaning you're making me uncomfortable. She then says, I don't really feel like I can ground myself. And Yaz says, do you suffer from anxiety? Back to the Kierkegaard stuff. She's like on her phone, by the way. She's not really paying attention. She goes, I do sometimes, meaning Yaz, I suffer from anxiety sometimes. Try magnesium. And Hayley says, just after what's happened between us, you and your husband, whether it was right, professionally, personally. And Yaz looks totally taken off guard. And she says, we're all consenting adults. And Hayley's like, right. Yaz says, you enjoyed it. So it can't be that that's making you uneasy. Calabasas, you are the one who instigated it. Like such a, almost, I want to say blame the victim type thing, but
yeah, no, it's 100% blame the, I mean, she's trying to gaslight Harry into saying like, she's like, no, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable because of what I did to you. Right. You were totally consenting in that encounter, even though Henry and I are your bosses and we're in a position of power relative to you. You should feel uncomfortable instead because of what Jim Diker did to you.
Right. She says, maybe you're sublimating your experiences, making a good thing bad, but that loser hack, he came back to your house under false pretenses. You don't remember what happened. I mean, God knows what happened. The price of his action is your trauma. You can't let him take away your agency as well. And Hayley's just kind of nodding like, yeah, I don't believe anything you're saying. Hayley says, yeah, you're probably right. And Yaz says, I am right. It was assault. And then she hugs Hayley and kisses her in this protective motherly way that's like so performative. And Hayley is totally just like, this
and
is
as
all
we're
bullshit.
watching this, by the way, Yasmin's face, the second she's hugging Hayley, immediately she drops the mask. She's like, oh God, like, I can't believe I had to do this.
Like, shit, now this is a potential liability, which like, duh.
Right, but she's reminding Hayley that she was a victim in another circumstance, where, by the way, like, we don't think Hayley actually felt she was a victim.
Right.
And she's convincing her that she had total agency in this other thing where, listen, I don't think Hayley was a victim there either. I think Hayley is trying to say, like, I can weaponize victimhood whenever I want to, just so you know. And I think Yasmin's being like, no, you can't. I'm going to try to gaslight you into thinking that you had total control. Don't play that game with me. I know how to weaponize stories as much as the next person.
Yep. All right. So next scene, we're in, I guess, the back room. Henry is doing push-ups to like psych himself up for this speech he has to give. Whitney comes in, back from Accra, says wants to wish him good luck. And Henry is pissed. He says, what is this disappearing act you keep pulling in Africa? And Whitney tells him that he's trying to smooth over the adoption of the app, whatever. Henry says, I'm not comfortable with this Pierpoint relationship. The app shouldn't come with some Trojan horse for capital markets apparatus. We're not a fucking broker. And Whitney says, you couldn't be more wrong. He like has been all in on this tender bank killer angle. He says, give the man his broker. Investment planning shouldn't be the purview only of the elite. And Henry says, my role here isn't going to be ambassadorial. I want it to be financial and strategic. I don't want to have to keep checking my corners. And Whitney says, I agree. Total transparency, which is what the app is offering. Like we promised. ISAs, which is independent savings account, ETFs, exchange traded funds, like you can buy into like the S&P, blah, 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 blah. You're giving people the dignity of being able to choose for themselves. Henry says, Pierpoint totally fucked the valuation of Lumi. Remember, he blames Pierpoint, even though it was not Pierpoint's fault that what happened. Right. But he is blaming Pierpoint for his company in season 3 imploding, even though it was really a hedging issue on his part for not hedging the freaking price of natural gas and actually having an idea about what could happen with the risks of being a freaking utility, if you will. But regardless, Whitney says, come on, man, is it even really Pierpoint anymore? He then snaps, just like he did with Hayley to get attention from Henry as Henry's looking at his phone. He says, go out there and tell them about your conscience. He grabs his arms and he says, it's just a speech. Henry seems frustrated with Whitney here. By the way, he's been like frustrated with everyone. He's been frustrated with Yaz, frustrated with Whitney. Henry then kind of walks away a little bit. Whitney then gets up out of his chair, goes over to Henry and says, it's just a day. It's just a speech. It's just a deliverance. And so again, this is also giving me that like Don Draper vibe. So this is all marketing, blah, blah, blah. And Henry is getting frustrated. He says, don't bullshit me. Whitney says, Henry, I hired you because I look at people like you and I innately believe in them more than I believe in myself. Fuck knows what that says about the fascism of our neurology, but everything in me screams, you are more, I am less. You are a man I am incapable of lying to. Now, as he's saying this, Henry is almost like looking at his mouth and they're getting closer and closer.
Their faces are incredibly close.
Yep. Whitney is holding his arms and it's obviously like giving very sexual tension vibes. Mm-hmm. Yaz then walks in and it's very like incriminating. As he does this, Whitney drops Henry's arms and Yaz says, you'll be great, okay? And Henry then looks to Whitney, who says, you've got this. And as Whitney walks out, he gives Yaz this kind of odd look. So
yeah, I mean, so from the beginning of this scene, when he's getting ready in the room, he's doing push-ups in his undershirt. We have seen more of Kit Harington's body in this season thus far than we have seen of any other person's body, except for, you could argue, Harper. The sexual gaze on Kit Harington's body, I don't think is supposed to be an accident here. I think that he is almost being put in this position of like the male or female gaze on the male body to continue our like almost theme of pornography, right? He was naked in the tub. He's naked, like he was naked in the pool last. He's naked all the time because he, of everyone here, seems to have the least agency of any of our principal actors. And so by having him in that naked presentation, it is showing him as kind of the vulnerable one here. And while he's coming at Whitney, and remember, Whitney's always in a full suit in his American Psycho getup. He's sitting down in this scene, taking the position of almost like, okay, Henry, I'm going to let you tell me how it is. I'm the listener here. And then he stands up and takes control and tells Henry about his conscience. And to your point from the last episode when talking about the commander, I do think that Whitney is now moving into this fatherly figure for Henry through this scene where he is not confident that Yaz is adequately pulling the strings to get Henry where he needs to be. This is him stepping in and taking matters into his own hands and telling Henry exactly what he's always wanted to hear. That you in your position of privilege, there is something so innately great about you, that I do look up to you, that it is about you and it's not about your patronage and your birth or anything like that. It is just about who you are. So there is such a sexual tension between them throughout this scene. And I think when Whitney leaves, I think he's almost like, that's how it's done, kind of, to Yasmin in a way.
Oh,
or,
interesting.
I think there was that interpretation, or there's a, now you need to contend with me being the voice of Henry's conscience. That we had the commander and the gray lady. Now we've gotten rid of the old suicidal voice of his dad and supplanted that with the new commander of Whitney, who is now taking control and is superseding the gray lady of Yasmin, who is no longer enough to get him where he needs to go.
Right. Yeah. And again, you could see him like physically recoiling from her. Whereas like in the past, he was like, he is
not recoiling from Whitney's touch whatsoever. And you see that scene because they shoot the whole scene with their faces so close together. It looks like they're about to kiss. And then we see it from Yasmin's angle and it looks even worse, right? He's got his hands on Henry's triceps. It looks like she's caught them in the act of something. And then Whitney steps back being like, sorry, didn't mean to overstep.
Yep. All right. So from here, we then go to Henry getting ready to go out on stage. And Lisa Dern walks in and makes a statement to him like, oh, you're the pussycat with 9 lives. And Henry tries to thank her for having the humility and introducing him. And she was like, this is not because I believe in you. This is just your wife's inappropriate relationship with Jennifer Bevan, basically. I'm just here towing the party line. So she goes up on stage. Henry gets super frazzled by that whole interaction again, similar to what happened with the PRA in the prior episode. And you see, by the way, Jennifer Bevan's there, Harper, Jim, all in the audience. Lisa goes up on stage and she starts to give her speech. Says how it is aligning like the core values that the government has championed, equity, transparency, blah, blah, blah. Henry then turns to Yaz and he says, I really don't think I could do this. He didn't think he could from the beginning. And now he's literally in the moment and he doesn't feel like he can do this. And she says, no. He says, do you think I could have a lorazepam or something? And she says, I don't know if that would constitute a relapse. She then realizes that actually like he just needs to get through this. And she says, listen, if you need to, then of course you can. And Henry gets mad at her and he says, why would you say that to me? You know, that's not an option. You're supposed to talk me down off the fucking cliff. And she's like, are you testing me? Like, are you using again? Which I actually, again, like I'm usually like recently I've been kind of like Yaz has been a little crazy, but like, I mean, yeah, that was
I feel so bad for her. What do you do? Right. She's like, I don't know. Is that a relapse?
Well,
and
the
then
first,
he's like, right.
On first watch, I thought that he was yelling at her because her even suggesting that that could be a relapse is what set him off.
No, he's yelling at her because she failed the test. And she's like, are you testing me? Like, what? That's so unfair. I mean, again, and that is like classic addict enabler behavior. I feel really bad for her because she set herself up in a lose-lose situation here.
Yeah. And he says, how dare you say that to me? She says, why can't you accept that I want what's best for you? Because again, to your point, what is best for him is what is best for her. So even if it's selfish, he is her partner. Like they are married. So he looks frantic. We then say, Lisa say, I'm pleased to introduce you to Henry Muck. He's kind of like, oh, fuck. He goes up on stage. He says, you're going to be amazing. Robin and Whitney again are like standing there. He goes on stage. He looks startled. And then he starts awkwardly. So he starts to read what's on the teleprompter. And it's super elitist, right? He says, I'm not a neoliberal cultist. Hop up on the lie that markets are the solution to everything. And he goes on, he reads it, blah, blah, blah. And he says, but I would like it known we have put our conscience at the heart of what we do at Tender. But then again, as he's saying this, he doesn't believe what he's saying. None of the audience is reacting. And so then he goes off script in a very Eric from season 3, episode
Finale.
8, Pierpoint finale, where he gives this impassioned, emboldened speech. And that's what basically Henry is doing too.
But it's important to know that it's when he says the word conscience that he completely flips. Because remember, his conscience is now no longer his dad. It's Whitney.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. Yep. So he says, I have failed prodigiously. I have succeeded unfairly. It is a matter of public record. And if you are sick of listening to me, I understand. Believe me. But this is how I see the world, even with the blinkers of my privilege, and perhaps especially because of them. And if you think I am incapable of seeing a world that way, then you are saying I am inhuman, that I am incapable of empathy. No, I am only human. Robin then is like touching his own head and he's just like, oh my God. He says to Yaz, he's laying it on a little thick. Is anyone going to buy this? Yaz says, if he buys it, then they will. The whole thing similar to like Eric and Don Draper and blah, blah, blah. Henry then says, we have to believe we can change the intransigent structures and expectations of where we happen to be born and to whom. This is the bedrock of our apps philosophy. Frictionless, transparent, access to the full suite of banking and investment products. Demystifying the complex world of finance for all members of the great British public. Now observe the cumulative effect of what happens when you give people the power to stop patronizing them with handouts, admonishing their vices and sneering at their virtues. Today, I offer you my sincerity. And sincerity now is the world's rarest commodity. Not here, not a Tender, not under my watch. Everyone claps. Harper,
you got the music soaring. Like, he did it.
He did it. And it's similar sort of like to the season 3 thing where it's like, did people believe it? Did they buy it? Like, right. But it's perceived as a giant success.
We know
Henry
that
buys it. Yes.
And I will also say this is 100% the philosophical theme of the individual again, right? So back to Kierkegaard, there's this theme of transcendence that happens when Henry shares his individual truth. Henry spent his whole life being reduced to an abstraction. Rich kid, you're just another number. You're just a kid from privilege who never did anything on his own, who had everything handed to him, and you're a failure. And so the only way that he can finally transcend all of those abstractions is by subverting all of them and acknowledging where he had gone wrong and saying, you're right, I'm just another dude. I am just a person with a conscience, and that's what this is. And that's why he's successful all of a sudden. Whereas he had always wanted to go out and like tell his truth. And Yasmin was like, weaponize your trauma against yourself, right? Like everyone had been pushing him to all of these things and he was using other people's words. These are Henry's words because this is all he's ever wanted. He wants people just like Yaz, by the way, who just wanted to be valued for her work and not her social standing. That's what Henry wants. Henry just wants people to think he's good because he's Henry, right? Yeah. And like they just go about it in very different ways.
Yeah. Well, it is so interesting too, that if you look at like the two groups of people that we are setting up against each other, and we're going to see like how they all kind of get in bed together, but it's like you have Henry and Whitney, 2 white men, Hayley and Yaz, also 2 white women, who, by the way, most of whom were all born into privilege. I guess Whitney was not, but Harper and Yaz were. But then on the other side, you have Harper.
Although Whitney went to Stanford, so like he has moved up. Like he has overcome that, especially in the American, way.
Yeah. But then on the other side, it's like you've got Harper, you've got Eric, you've got Kwabena, and you've got Sweet Pea. So it's like woman.
I know Sweet Pea grew up poor.
Yes, because she made that point. So it's just, and we know Harper like had this whole situation with her family, like also grew up poor, non-target school. Eric talks about how his dad was like, a working
poor immigrant. Yep.
We don't know Kwabena's story, but
yeah.
it's such a dichotomy between the two. And I mean, I'm guessing this was not an accident is all.
Well, especially because of what Harper says in like 5 seconds in the script. I'm 100% with you. And I think it's establishment versus non-establishment, like we talked about earlier. And then there is very much the racial element to it, which is always running throughout, and which is also an implication on, changing Hugo's last name from Rishi's to Smith.
Oh, that's like such a good point.
Most white British last name imaginable. So his racial heritage through Hugo's last name has been erased. But there is this moment then when Henry steps off stage And Yasmin's like, I told you could do it. And he literally is like, move, bitch. And goes and embraces Whitney in this like big hug.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in case we were wondering who now is on his shoulder, he is totally embracing Whitney. And whatever Whitney wants to do, he's on board now because Whitney has led him to Valhalla, right? Versus Yasmin, who just couldn't get it done. Who was like trying to draw, he thought she's trying to draw me back into my dark place. And she's just like, I just want you to succeed. This is all I know how to do.
I mean, again, it goes back to people's motivations. Like her motivation is to have him succeed, whether that's because she truly cares about him or it makes her succeed if he succeeds. But regardless, like she does want what's best
motivation?
for him.
Like Whitney is making you think he wants him to, like Whitney has.
Well, but he's
like,
been saying
no
all the
love for
things.
Henry.
He's like, I look at you and I could never
he's
lie
saying
to you.
all the right things.
Right. Well, he's a more convincing person. Like that's what it goes back to. Who can freaking tell the most convincing story and make you believe it? That's the whole thing. Like you got to believe it. So from here, he says, I'm going to take questions after. So they go in, it almost looks like a freaking cafeteria, but they go into some like other room where there's a whole bunch of reporters around and someone asks about like, how are they going to handle AI integration, blah, blah, blah. Jim then comes up and he says, can you tell me what Tender actually does? He's like, you're telling me what Tender is going to do. What do you do now?
I also, by the way, feel like this is like a bit of a proxy for the average viewer who's like, what does this company do?
I couldn't tell
us being like, what are they doing wrong? Like,
right. What is happening? And Whitney says, can you repeat the question? He does. He said, what does Tender do? And Henry laughs. He's just like, what do you mean? But Jim says it's a straightforward question. And he also says, given how quickly you severed ties with me, Mr. Halberstrom, after I profiled you, well, I take it you loathe simple questions. Robin
and
then
so
says,
when did that happen, by the way?
Right. And again, I wonder if we're going to get more information about this as the episode, because I still don't know. And I think it's probably just, it's, goes back to like Harper, I just want to do good work. Jim is a dog with a bone, using this as a way to kind of like give himself purpose. So I think that that's probably part of it, but regardless. So Whitney says, great piece from Fin Digest, well researched. What is it that we do? We are a successful payment processor leveraging our existing user base to make targeted acquisitions and become a market leader in the UK fintech space. Jim says, right. Just a growing number of people think your numbers don't stack up. And Whitney says, well, if you are trying to prove a prejudice, everything you look at is prejudicial. These people you're speaking about, do they brief you or do you brief them? Or does it matter as long as you're all making money while you twist the knife, meaning the short sellers? Harper is watching this whole interaction very closely. And Jim says, so you're not denying anything. Whitney says, we're regularly audited. We have equity analysts poring over our balance sheet. What is there to spotlight other than the brutal success of our stories? And Jim says, and your payment processors in Sunderland? Whitney pauses for a second, like he's onto something. And he says, we've got outposts that process payments all over Africa, Europe, Asia Pac, and the UK, including, but not exclusive to the Northeast. Harper is watching this whole thing. And as Jim is talking, it like zooms in on Yaz and Harper looking at each other. Harper kind of gives this almost like smile. And Jim says, it's just, you see, I think it's your fixation on the future is a smokescreen for the lies of your past. And Whitney says, okay, well, happily sidebar. We have investor days. We have earnings calls. We're wide fucking open. Next question. And it's just funny as Jim walks out, like all the players are like looking at each other. It's like Harper and Yaz and like everyone's there for this. Like,
yeah, the way Whitney pauses on the Sunderland news indicates that, okay, you struck a nerve. That's when Harper looks at Yaz. Yaz looks at Harper. Everyone's looking at Whitney's reaction that he was like, okay, like, all right, now I know you're onto something. And we know that they are covering up the fact that they are still processing porn payments with that Sunderland facility where they are just lumping all these payments into categories without specifying what they are. But still not the crazy smoking gun, other than still processing porn payments. So whatever.
Right. So next scene, we're in the Fin Digest offices and Jim thinks that he's like, hit the jackpot. He's so excited. He's writing up his article and his boss basically calls him in. And as he's walking in, he like realized, he says, my dad used to look at me like that to his boss, this like Ed dude. And he sits down, he shows him a markup like this, a markup of a newspaper on the screen that says, the men who hate Britain. He says, your name, my name, short sellers, corrupt, money-grabbing enemies of British innovation. They've even managed to link this bloke, Eric Tao, to the fucking Cultural Revolution. And there's heavy allusions to you being a drug user, which you are not, are you? And then he's like, it doesn't even matter. But I was like, holy shit, Yaz went all out. Like she's like, I mean, yeah. The boss like is like, you know what? It doesn't even matter. But he then throws him the photo of him and Harper together. And he says, it says that you're cavorting with short sellers. And Jim is like, I've spoken to them, but these are words. It's meaningless. Like, this is what Haberstrom does. Where is the proof of profiting? And then he says, I would assume that my editor would have my back. This is blackmail. And the boss then takes off his glasses and he asks, who is Hayley Clay? And Jim obviously struggles to answer. He knows that he obviously did something wrong. And he's like, well, she works the tender. And his boss says, okay, well, you coerced and according to the complaint, assaulted her. And Jim says, I never touched her. And the boss says they're weighing charges. And Jim is just kind of spiraling. He's like, I never touched her. I was trying to do my job. I was just trying to get the story. And the boss then says, basically, I have to fire you. And Jim just is like, no, you can't do that. He says, in your gut, I know that when you went to her flat, you made a fatal error in judgment. Jim says, as he's starting to tear up, I need this. And the boss says, I can't do anything. But this is why it just keeps going. Like, the whole theme of this thing is like people wanting to do work. It's like you have Eric coming out of retirement. He doesn't need the money. He's doing it to do work. Harper says, I need this. Like, this is life and death for me. It's because I want to do it. It's nothing more than that. Rishi had his work taken away from him and now he's lost and he's floundering. Jim needs this. It's just like people need work.
Yep.
Anyway, so
I feel so bad for Jim Diker here, but also like his boss is actually doing the right thing. You can't find out about this and not do something about it. And the only 2 sexual encounters we know of Jim Diker's like have not worked out so well for him.
No. So next scene, you have Sweet Pea and she's reading the Atterbury emails and Harper asks if there's anything interesting. Sweet Pea says, no, like Whitney never really talks business. She says, the one thing that's interesting is there's some guy, Tony Day, who's based in Accra. He was like a Durham alum, decade at Morgan Stanley in operations, it seems like, then went to Daiwa Securities. And then it seems like he was fired, moved to Accra in 2011 when Ghana's GDP was growing. And he had a failed telecom business. And then suddenly he's CFO of Tender in Africa. Harper says, meteoric over promotion, even for a white guy. And Sweet Pea then says, and she's like showing her some pictures, there's a $50 million acquisition that was closed with a novelty check. She says, that's what they paid for this third-party processor, Swift GC. It's artificial, right? Meaning the image of the novelty check. And Harper says, presentation is pretense. And again, it goes back to like my little marketing theme. Sweet Pea says, he looks like the hated chairman of a lower league football team, not the CFO of a multinational payments processor. It's a bit of a song and dance. It's cheap. And Harper asks, I wonder if anyone's flown to Accra and knocked on their door. And they look at each other like, ooh, another field trip. And Jonah had mentioned Tony Day, I think, in that first episode and been
this
like,
guy has been dangled in front of us from the beginning that this is whom Whitney is going to meet with in Accra every single time.
Yes. And we don't know who it is. And I'm assuming we're going to find out pretty soon. Okay. So from here, we then go to the office with Robin and Yaz. They both come in to see Whitney. And basically, Whitney tells Yaz that she is going to be co-running communications with Robin. And Robin is like, the fuck I am. He says, I'm not working with her. She has no skills. I'm not going to work with someone so underqualified. And Whitney says, well, if you're not going to work with her, then I'll let Yaz do the honors and fire you. So they basically fire Robin. Whitney does say, you're a little bit trad for what we want to do next. Is that to Robin, that he wants someone more ruthless. Robin then says, this isn't a startup. You should Google the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically it's like, you are wildly incompetent at this.
But totally unself-aware and just blundering ahead. Which is, by the way, the story of like everyone in finance, okay? Like fake it till you make it. So
it's the story of everybody. Nobody knows what the hell they're doing anywhere. Anytime.
Also, by the way, I think Yasmin has been wildly competent at this marketing strategy. Like I
agree.
I think she's done everything right.
But it's funny,
we have the lack of qualifications, like because she didn't have a marketing degree. Again, English major in finance. Like go away, Robin.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I mean, we had that conversation too, that I actually thought she was doing a good job in sales back in like seasons 1, 2, and 3, when everyone was like, Yasmin sucks at her job. Yasmin sucks at her job. But she's like getting to know the clients. Like she knows the kids' names. Like she was like doing things that a good salesman
part of sales. She wasn't good at the technical skills.
Fair. So as Robin walks out, Whitney tells Yaz that she did a great job on Diker, that they stopped the story from running. And by the way, so it turns out that they probably didn't publish this like newspaper thing. That was just blackmail. So Whitney then says, Hayley is yours if you want her, but you, me, and Henry. And he sort of like grasps his hands. He says, we ride together, we die together, which is, by the way, like wild. He literally just met Henry, I don't know, 3 months ago when he like came in. He had never met Henry before this. It almost seems like they go back to being like college buddies, but no, they had never met each other. Like they met through Yaz, who was like, give my husband a job. And then he's like, cool, we ride 100%. Together, we die together.
By the way, it was give my husband a job in exchange for me getting you in good with the government. That was the tit for tat there that happened. So when he's doing that, in my mind, he's saying, hey, you can have Hayley if you want her. You thought you guys were the threesome. You can keep thinking that if you want, but
We're the
threesome. Yeah. And you thought you were the leader of that little triangle and you were ordering everyone around. I am the leader of our little triangle and I am the one pulling all the strings.
Yep. So from here, we then go into an elevator with Yaz and Hayley. I feel like so many things happen in the elevator. And Yaz says, Whitney gave me the green light to promote you. Comms roll under me. Hayley smiles. And Yaz says, are you okay about earlier? Remember, last conversation they had, Hayley was leaving breadcrumbs that she was not okay with what happened. And like that was a potential liability. And Hayley says, oh yeah, sure. It's not like I haven't been sexually harassed before. I was a child model for fuck's sake. And it's interesting. Like we've never really heard her talk that like sassy almost. Yes.
Well, I also think back to your point about what's happened on other shows. You know, they had her character on Mad Men go through this like sexual awakening as a young woman. And so there was like the sexualization of her as a child on that show, which was like controversial at the time. And so I feel like that if you want to pull in your thread a little bit more of like roles in other things, I think there might be something a little bit there with that reference.
Interesting. But Yaz's face doesn't react. She's just like staring straight ahead. And Hayley says, you're promoting me because you really rate me, right? By the way, a word that I had never heard before, except for used in Succession. But so it just means like you really like me. And Yaz says, yeah, of course. And Hayley says, I thought it was because of how I sucked your husband's, you can fill in the blank. I wonder why did it feel like it was your in my mouth? She looks at Yaz, who was just staring straight ahead. And then she says, I liked that. And she then continues. She says, an ex-boss told me an anxiety relief thing once. Yaz says, breathing exercises? And Hayley says, no. He said, Hayley, baby, when it all gets too much, just remember, not a single one of us gets out of here alive. We then hear the door opening. Hayley walks out. She lifts her like skirt up and you can see that she's wearing like lingerie. And she looks back at Yasmin and goes, thank you, mommy, and gives a smile and walks off. And Yasmin just almost looks confused. But clearly, I mean, Yasmin has thought she was in control this whole time. Like, no. Hayley knows what she's doing.
Midway through that scene, what happens is Yasmin suddenly realizes what Hayley's doing. That Hayley has been in control the whole time. And that she now, like, Yasmin totally misjudged the stakes here. So Yasmin is the one who is taking deep breaths to calm herself when she, in fact, says breathing exercises. Like, that's what she's doing to suddenly calm down because she realizes that she's like trapped in this steel box with this woman who is a complete psychopath. Mm-hmm. And when Hayley says the line from her boss, no one gets out of this alive, you kept bringing up Fight Club. As far as I can tell, that's a quote from Fight Club, which is on a long enough time frame, everyone's survival rate drops to 0. But it's also the line from... I know, like we were talking about Blake Lively. I know Ryan Reynolds has like fallen out of favor, but one of my favorite all-time movies was always Van Wilder. And his like tagline in that movie is like, don't take life too seriously. You'll never get out alive. I think the actual origin of the quote is Jim Morrison. But I was like, oh, Kristen was talking about Fight Club. Like this felt like the Fight Club reference there. I doubt it was the Van Wilder reference. And maybe it's the Jim Morrison reference from The Doors. But with the thank you, mommy line, you have your Handmaid's Tale reference. So listen, is this mommy in the sense of like our old daddy issues that we've had throughout this show where it's like, oh, you're the boss and whatever, but you're like daddy and it's got this perverse nature? Or is, to your theory, Hayley pregnant and Yaz has midwifed this into being that like, who's the mommy here? I don't know. Like it's super weird, but I was like, Kristen's gonna have a field day with all of her theories here. I wasn't sure. In this scene too, remember, going back to the who's fucking whom, remember, we had Whitney being penetrated by Harper. Now we're having another person suggest that there is a woman in the scenario who is the phallus holder, right? That why did it feel like it was you in my mouth, not your husband? So who is fucking whom here yet again? Who's in control and who's not? Because by the way, the person who is on the receiving end of this always seems to be the person in control. It's Whitney, who is in control of Harper through that act, even though it's giving her the illusion of control. And it's Hayley who in fact was in control of Yasmin through that act, even though, again, I don't know, but like there is a lot to this scene. It feels very ominous. I just was like stressed out this whole episode, like freaking hives everywhere.
Yep. All right. So next scene, we get my commentary, which made me very happy. So Ferdinand and Whitney walk into Henry's office, and Ferdinand says, we just got off the phone with Wilhelmina, the CEO of Mirage Pierpoint. So we know that, like I said, she's officially the CEO. They offered the financing we asked for in the form of a COCO, a contingent convertible bond. Henry says, so they're protecting their downside. Have they seen something they don't like? Whitney says, it depends how you look at it. It's a bridge for while we grow our deposit base. Repayment only gets triggered if the stock falls below a certain threshold, which we know it won't, not with the momentum we have. Okay, sorry. This is me being like super picky, but as someone who I love converts, this is not a COCO. This is the normal convert. This is just like finance 101. It's gonna be really quick. You can fast forward this if you don't give a shit about the finance stuff, but this is what I live for. Basically, when it comes to raising money, you can do it in the form of straight up equity where, if things go really well, if Pierpoint gives a investment in tender and things go great, they make a shit ton of money. If things go poorly, they lose a ton of money. There's also a loan, right? So that's you just lend money in the form of debt. And regardless of what happens to the stock price, you would get paid back. What a regular convert is it protects your downside because it's basically a loan if the share price does poorly and it's equity if the share price does well. That's what they're describing here. Typical convert. It's a loan, but if things go well, you get to convert into equity. And if you are Pierpoint, win-win, right? COCO is different. And this would make sense if it was tender that was investing in Pierpoint. What the COCO does is it's almost like debt if things go well and equity if things go poorly. That's why with the Credit Suisse situation, people who were investing in these Credit Suisse bonds, they could get wiped to zero and be subordinated to the equity. So that's why that was that whole thing where it's actually the opposite. And the reason that banks would use this is it was a way for them to get, it's called their tier 1 capital ratio up so that they would have enough money to have aside. If you're making a whole bunch of loans and stuff, regulators require you have a certain amount of cash on hand and stuff. And again, this equity in the business. So it was a way for these banks to raise that tier 1 capital ratio, and it would allow them to absorb losses in times of stress. But what would happen is in times of stress, you actually as an investor could get wiped out. So there is no way in hell Pierpoint's we want to invest in the form of a COCO to protect our downside. It should be that they're investing in a regular convert to protect their downside, because if the share price falls too low, it's a regular loan. They owe the money back. They owe the $1 billion back. But again, if things go well, they don't owe the money back, and Pierpoint will provide the upside with them. So cool. That was my finance commentary. I'm very excited about talking about a convert. But they did talk about COCOs, I think, in the last season. But in that sense, it did make sense because it was the banks that were issuing these things,
right?
Not the investors.
The issuer. Right.
Yeah. It's all what are the pros and cons as the issuer, as the investor? And as the investor, if you're Pierpoint dictating the terms, you're not going to be dictating a COCO. You're going to be no, I want to convert. I want to have that downside protection, but then I want the upside. So
got it.
That's all. Okay. So Henry then says,
but then this all gets flipped on its head anyways.
Yeah. Then he says, given how distressed of an asset Pierpoint is, I think we should basically go out in the market and buy equity in them. So
let's invest in them. But
right.
also, this is, to me, it shows where Henry has done a complete 180, because this whole thing was I don't want to support Pierpoint. I hate Pierpoint. Pierpoint took me down. I hate them. And now he's Pierpoint looks cheap. Let's go buy them and use our equity stake to then gain control over their company and make them do what we want.
It's like a snake swallowing its tail. It's you're going to give us money so we can take that money and go buy into, what?
So you made $1 billion investment in us. We want another $1 billion from you. And in fact, we're going to give you $1 billion back.
Yeah. So very strange, but whatever. Whitney says, I think that's smart. Ferdinand says to Henry, I loved your speech. I saw it online. It was brilliant. And as Ferdinand leaves, we then hear Henry and Whitney talking.
Well, and Ferdinand also calls him a man possessed, meaning you were possessed by the spirit of this idea. But I also think it's an interesting turn of phrase, given our friend Henry is also possessed by actual ghosts.
Right. As Ferdinand leaves, Henry goes to Whitney and says, thank you for everything you said to me before I went out. Your belief meant a lot. Whitney says, permission to speak out of turn. Henry says, yes, please. Whitney says, some people see people as just moving parts, a social process, objects that can either help or hinder. There's a few things more toxic in the world than privileged people who are intellectually insecure. Henry then says, you see, that's quite loaded. If you want to insult my wife, have the good grace to come out and say it. He's the one that's reading into that.
I didn't take that to be what he was saying at all.
I didn't either. So, but clearly that's what he thinks about his own wife.
Correct.
That's how he's taking it.
Yes.
So Whitney says, I see people differently. You have an innate worth that supersedes the life you were born into. I believe that about myself too. It's what I live to achieve and yearn to do. Show the world my true value. And Henry says, well, we helped each other do that. And Whitney says, at least for a day.
And while they're having this conversation, they are extremely intimately close again. And Whitney is touching Henry again. So now back to Whitney, who we have seen previously that he may or may not have like various predilections. Like, does he actually have romantic feelings towards Henry? I don't know. And I feel like what we've learned about Whitney through the lens of Jonah is that he doesn't have true romantic feelings towards anyone. It's just when it serves him, he'll give the impression that sex is on the table, or he'll use sex as
well. What's the definition? I don't know if it's a sociopath. I probably should have looked it up, but it's like people where they
pretend to have human emotion. So they just wear that mask. Back to American Psycho, but yes.
Yep. Okay. So this next scene, the last of this.
The next 12 minutes are some of the most upsetting, painful 12 minutes of TV I've ever watched.
Same. And we got to watch it. It's funny.
3 times.
Well, I only did the last scene twice because I couldn't. So, all right. We see Jim crying in a bathroom doing coke in some dive bar. Rishi then walks in and they end up outside smoking together. Jim says, I know who you are. I'm sorry, but what happened to your wife, for what it's worth, I think they demonized you. So we're getting this confirmation about what we kind of knew happened. Rishi says, I deserved it. Jim said, I remember the skewed coverage. And this, by the way, is coming from a reporter. He says, and it would have been very different if you weren't you and she wasn't, no offense, but posh and white. They said the guy who went down for it was a schizophrenic, right? Or BPT. Is that bipolar disorder?
Bipolar.
Yep. Some diminished responsibility. Rishi says, yeah, her family are fighting the manslaughter charge. He got a hospital disposal. Brain went west after a few years smoking weapons-grade skunk, so his lawyer argued. Now, it's very interesting. In the headlines literally this week, we saw the Kanye West, who had been posting tons of anti-Semitic stuff online. I mean, he's been awful recently, and he came out with a huge apology talking about how he had a brain injury that has like made him... I mean, he's talked about struggles with like mental illness, but I did think that was interesting. Just tie in with the
whole
news
conversation
cycle
about mental health throughout and people's liability for their own actions. We have Henry who like, oh, I wasn't liable for my actions because I was in this state talking to Jennifer Bevan about assaulting her. I'm in my recovery. It wasn't me. It was this other me. No, it was you.
But it's like, you're always, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you have to take responsibility. And especially I think
and that's why Rishi is saying, I deserved it. He wants people to know he feels guilty and he hasn't been able to take responsibility. I think him saying, I deserved it is really important. He wants to make amends for what he did wrong and he can't.
And not only that, it's also interesting in the context of the clip that they show of Diana and the words that she said right before she got shot.
And I don't know how they orchestrated someone else to take the fall for it, by the way. We had this conversation earlier, but at this point, I was wondering, I was like, who took the fall for it? Did you collaborate with the loan shark to set up some other dude? So there are 2 crimes that have been committed. Your wife was murdered, and now you have had someone else take the fall for it because it wasn't Vinay.
Yep. And it's interesting that when they flash back, because this is going to happen a little bit later, but I think it's important. We can read it now. We can talk about it again. Right before Diana gets murdered, you'll remember last season, she says to Vinay, she says, you're the worst kind of person because he might be sick and selfish, but you feed off his sickness. I bet you have no idea what it feels like to feel love. So she is even almost forgiving Rishi for putting them in that position and saying to Vinay, you were feeding off of this. Like you were profiting from this. You were using him for this whole end.
And now Rishi
he's taking
is
responsibility.
Profiting off of somebody else taking the heat for this crime.
Jim makes one other statement. He says, for fuck's sakes, mate, you saw it? Like question mark. And as they're talking about this, someone next to them offers them a cigarette. And a man runs over and says, fuck off, you urchin, to the guy that offered a cigarette, pushes him away and says, I've seen him operating out here before. He looks for wasted people and then gives them cigarettes loaded with spooky PCP or some shit. It'll fuck you up. He takes you around the corner. He'll turn you over for your wallet and your watch. So Rishi and Jim are just like, oh, okay, thanks for saving us, I guess. And Rishi says, you want to go in for a pint? And they all go in and they, I guess, get some drinks together. And then they end up back at someone's house. I don't know.
It appears to be Rishi's house on second and third watch because the cocaine is hidden in the toilet.
Yes. You're right.
But at first I didn't know where they were. I didn't know how they got from the bar to this apartment. But also my immediate thought was this guy's in on the scam.
I didn't think that at first. I thought that he was, after you had said to me, what was that guy doing there? And I was like, that guy I think was totally orchestrated by Whitney.
See, this I didn't I did not get this being orchestrated by Whitney. I just
maybe not Whitney, but
yeah, I thought this was the scam that these guys were running. This person comes up to you, then the savior comes in and rescues you and ingratiates himself into your group so then he can rob you. That was my take of who this guy was.
Yeah, I blame Whitney for everything. So
I think it's entirely possible.
So again, they're now in a house, they're doing lines, and Jim tells Rishi that he's flying to Accra next week. He's going to self-publish. Someone will pick it up. Like, this is great. So Rishi then says to Jim, I have to admit something. I know you too. I did a little work for Harper Stern before that silly cunt ghosted me. So now we also know that Harper is not responding to Rishi.
She has replaced Rishi with Sweet Pea for all of her investigative work. And by the way, who seems to be doing a more successful job with it?
Yeah. And Jim says, oh, you've been following me? And Rishi says, I looked into you a little. Jim says, you broke into my house? And Rishi says, I was wondering whether to short tender in my personal account. I thought I might be able to get a little bit of an edge. And Jim says, you think I'm the type of person to tell you
Which is a joke, by the way, because we know that Rishi has no money of his own, right? Like there's no you know, so he's still in his mind, the trader. This is what'll happen all the time on the trading floor. Guys will be like, do it PA, right? Joking about how much money they have.
Yeah.
Like he's still using that old lingo because he just misses his old life.
Yeah. So Jim says, you think I'm the type that will tell you when to pile in before publishing? And Rishi says, we're all just trying to secure our future, aren't we? So Jim asks, did you follow me tonight? Be honest. And Rishi says, I just wanted a pint, and that pub is full of them. And then Jim starts to laugh and he's like, it's full of pints? And Rishi says, no, women, I've got the disease. I love the birds. And Jim says, it was a gay bar, which I thought was funny. Now, by the way.
But also, why is Jim at a gay bar?
Yeah, because that's a good point. Unless they both follow each other there. I don't know, but that's a good point. Yeah.
I thought Rishi followed Jim accidentally to a gay bar, not knowing it was a gay bar.
But that's interesting because we've only ever seen Jim with women. Like he's
correct.
Like, so.
But everyone seems to swing both ways on this show.
Seriously.
So who knows?
Seriously. But in the background, the guy who like was the random person that came up to them is in the background just like blaring the music.
Which makes the whole scene so uncomfortable and feels so ominous. And to me, it goes back to that American Psycho scene where Patrick Bateman invites Paul Allen back to his apartment and is like, let's play Huey Lewis and the News. And like Paul Allen is like totally out of it and drunk and like, what's going on, man? And Patrick Bateman is like suiting up in his plastic gear to murder this man with an axe. So I'm like, we have all this, and it's all these like power ballads akin to what was playing in Rishi's car about longing and love. And it's really discordant that we have this music here when they're having this, what turns out to be like a very pivotal conversation.
Yeah. So Jim then says that he met this one woman, Hayley, corporate smoke show, threw it on me. And then he admits that they like did hook up. But then when he looked up, she was passed out. Rishi says, I hope you stopped me. And Jim says, fuck off. I'm fucking sick of it. I'm sick of this discourse between the sexes. Not everything has to be a minefield these days. I mean, she gave consent, man, which we had talked about. Like, did she, which, I mean, I will say he literally like, she had given him a pill that he didn't take. So there was also a power imbalance, even like if she had anyway. Yeah.
She did not know to be clear, I do not think that was right what Jim Diker did with Hayley, even though we saw her give consent and we saw her being largely seemingly in control at the time. He lured her in sexually under false pretenses. And I do not think that she knew that he was the Fin Digest writer.
Well, it's like Robert last season where he walks in, and actually even this happened with Harper when they were both trashed out of their mind. Both were like, I want you. And he's like, no.
Or with Nicole, who harassed everybody. Robert consented to it, even though it wasn't an okay relationship.
Yeah, yeah. So Jim says, can I ask you a really prudent question? By the way, the guy turns the music down.
Prurient, meaning, so prurient is when I think this is important. So like prurient means like when you're viewing pornography is a prurient act, right? You are like super curious about this thing and like you're getting off on it sexually way. And so he's asking about like, this is an inappropriate question to ask. I'm talking about something that I shouldn't be seeing or shouldn't have seen.
Got it.
And
by the way, the guy with the music turns the music down at this point. So he's also like clearly listening in on what they're talking about as well.
Right.
I think.
By the way, again, we don't see what this guy is doing at any point in the background, but I assumed he kept turning the music up to cover the sound of him robbing them, but I didn't know.
Oh, so I assumed it was he was trying to get a noise complaint. I thought he was orchestrating this whole thing.
And it might be. I wasn't sure who hired him or who lured him there, if he was there on his own volition.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, we don't know. Like I said, we have not watched ahead. I had assumed after watching this a couple times that he was orchestrating, trying to like get them in trouble.
Out of your way to go when these guys are just drugged up. He could just call the police and been like, hey, something's up.
True. That's fair. But I thought,
I don't know. I mean, it just seems like a really specific way to orchestrate the police coming to this apartment.
It's like the wet bandits in Home Alone.
I like it. Yeah.
Jim then says, what was it like seeing your wife die like that? And then the guy turns the music back up to 90. And Rishi says, what? And then Jim says, stupid fucking question. You dissociated, right? And Rishi just says, right. And then it's like he does dissociate.
So they're having two separate conversations at this point. Rishi is now in this dreamlike state, talking about experiencing Diana's death and dissociating from the conversation he's having with Jim Diker. Jim Diker is reciting the extreme pornography that's on his feed and talking about it in this way that you would talk about like a run-of-the-mill news story, right? Like almost like this, like, oh my God, it was so crazy, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And Rishi is looking out the window at this white light.
And it's like a billowing,
fluttering curtains.
Yeah.
So the curtains are open to the balcony, but there is this white light and he's in this dream-like state. And so it's really interesting that while he's thinking about his wife's murder, Jim is going down this rabbit hole of talking about pornography in this extremely graphic, descriptive way. But he's been so desensitized to it is what he's getting at, is he's talking about this thing after just having asked about a brutal, gory murder. He's talking about this woman as though it were a murder of what he's seeing in this pornography. Rishi says, it's like I'm watching it, but it really isn't me. Going back to him filming himself, engaging in this sex act with a woman. He's watching it as though it's not really him, as though it's pornography. So like we've now entered this meta space where everyone has dissociated from their own lives and their own experiences. And like everything is pornography because pornography has cheapened everything.
Yeah. And by the way, at this point, the guy has turned the music volume up to max. We actually see it max at this point. And the song is playing.
Reminded me of This Is Spinal Tap, by the way. It's like, turn it up to 11.
Oh, funny. But there's a song playing. There's no words. And then we hear Rishi repeating Diana's last words about like the worst kind of person. We read that before. Jim is, by the way, doing more coke as he does this. And he says, we used to be creatures of action. And now we're just inner passive spectators, because we become a means of production, right? We just age without getting old. Stuck on a wheel of production and consumption. I mean, it's bread and circuses, man, streamed in glorious 4K. Rishi then is saying, I've never once dreamed of her, good or bad. And then he says, maybe I should just kill myself. Now, at this point, Jim is now back fully listening to Rishi. And he says, no, man, suicide, mate? Don't make me laugh. You are too selfish to conceptualize a world without yourself in it, having every base need catered to. And Rishi nods. Jim says, our granddads, yeah? They used to fucking paint Marilyn Monroe on the side of a fucking plane, and then they used that plane to firebomb Dresden. They'd be lucky to meet one Marilyn class type lady in the flesh once in their lives, which, by the way, like goes back to almost Diana and her blonde hair, who was like definitely that Marilyn type. But us, man, we're fucking jerking off to a dozen gang-banging Marilyns before dawn, and we wonder why we don't have the get up and go to die in a war. We're on a ghost ship. A fucking system that can incorporate any critique, just turn it into a marketable commodity. Nothing has depth, nothing has traction, nothing's fucking serious, right? We're just steam on a mirror. You're gonna die a fucking spectator, yeah? A priest at the altar of his own fucking ego. He then yells at the guy to turn down music again. But again, this was like deep, this whole thing.
This is to me the end outcome of the discourse on pornography. That like, this is when you get to this extremist where everything is just a simulacrum of experience, that nothing is real, that there is no meaning, right? Why would you go out and, to his point, like go die in a war for something that you can get whenever you want it? And it's so cheap versus having these noble ideas that you had to work for. And this is exactly what the discourse about pornography has become in terms of how it has, and what social media, everything, right? About viewing life through this dissociated lens where you can just get these dopamine hits whenever you want them by scrolling through whatever it may be. Why go out and actually take risk in your life to have human experience when it can end like this, by the way, when it ends up with like the people who are the risk takers and the doers end up in this miserable state. And the song that's playing in the background is, I had to look it up. It's Vienna by Ultravox, which I have never heard before, didn't know, but I was like, Vienna, we were in Vienna last episode, but I have like nothing more to say about the song because I was trying to find deeper meaning in these songs. And they were all just these like ballads about longing. And the line is only love can set you free. All of these platitudes about transcendence through love and finding these things. So grossly juxtaposed against these two guys high out of their minds doing drugs with this nefarious third party in the room. We still don't really understand his role. And it's this very bleak picture of what humanity has been reduced to thanks to this machine.
So at this point, by the way, because Jim has just said you're going to die a spectator, Rishi screams at him to shut the fuck up. And Jim starts laughing. And Rishi's screaming, why are you laughing? You don't know what it's like to be a father. And Jim says, no, I do, mate. You know what? It doesn't fucking change a thing. You're in his life. You're out of his life. He's fucking damned either way. And Rishi screams, that's bullshit. Because he basically believes that Mary is going to give his son this loving, and I forget if we like actually said this line, but Mary said he will grow up in a family of love. And
yeah, Rishi hopes that his son, that by him being out of his son's life now, which is how I interpreted it, that he is going to be okay, that he isn't going to have this legacy of disaster and hurt anymore. He's going to be okay.
And then Jim says, you know what I dream about? I dream about the fact that all of my friends are richer than me. And when I don't dream about that, I dream about a faceless fitness instructor making pornographic payday on her own fucking privacy. He then turns back to the radio guy and keeps screaming, I'm not going to ask you again, mate. Turn the music down, just to continually remind us that the music is there, it's loud, and he's not on board with this. Jim then continues. He says, we built an interface with the world, which gives us what we want, but not what we want to want, which goes back to that line that you had said before, that you think you want someone all the time, you want this, but like, no, you want, and I mean, we've had this conversation so many times. Friction is important. When it's too easy to get access to things, if drugs are everywhere, I mean, it's going to be a lot easier for someone to get it who then has like an addictive personality, and it destroys them. Same thing with porn, same thing with gambling. The easier you make it, sure, consumer's choice, but also, especially in a world where there's less religion, because religion and like the morals placed on you by believing in something and a higher power and all that. If you don't believe in that, what's stopping you from self-destruction?
Exactly.
So the music in the background, by the way, there was a line that says, this means nothing to me.
Yep.
And the guy who's maxing out the music then says, I'm going to leave to get more beers, leaving the music at max, which is why I thought it was a
deliberate attempt to get a noise complaint.
Exactly. And Rishi says he's going to go use the bathroom, finds a stash of coke because he's obviously been dealing.
I assumed that was his stash, like that this is his place.
Assume. Yeah. And so he finds some coke out of his toilet, does some, looks in the mirror. And then when he comes back outside, music is blaring and Jim has basically OD'd. Rishi goes to try to wake him up when then there was a knock on the door. Again, music's still blaring. And the cops are saying there's been a noise complaint. And by the way, I think it was possibly that guy who somehow like did the noise complaint even.
Yeah,
you know?
I just don't know why he didn't do that. Like, again, me having to suffer through this music could have been
because I think he was trying to get information out of them. I really do. I think he was there trying to listen in and then also trying to set them up. I also think, I mean, he mentioned the like laced
PCP. Yeah.
And I think he possibly did something to
totally agree that Jim may have done drugs that guy. I just didn't get and I think it's a great reading, and I think it's entirely possible that this man was sent by Whitney with this nefarious purpose, not that he was just like the scam that he was saying was what he was actually doing.
And I assume that they're just trying to get them thrown in jail, you know, like the cops are showing up. And so Rishi, by the way, because he has already been vilified in the press.
Yep.
Now in his house, there is possibly a dead guy. He's got a shit ton of coke. And that's why I was like, he probably was like, if this happens, my life is over. I mean, so I don't think he thought his life was over until he realizes the cops show up. And that's when he's like, I'm going to go to the window because now I have nothing else because I'm screwed. So that was why I had thought that this was the thing that put him over the edge, being like, shit, there's like a ton of coke here. Cops are at my door. I've already got a strike on me. And this is going to basically be the nail in my coffin.
I agree.
Yeah. Anyway, so he doesn't open the door. He then goes to the balcony, puts his feet over the side. You hear the police coming in and they go to Jim. The cops say, we have an adult male, unconscious and breathing, possible drug overdose. And they notice the man on the balcony. Rishi is over the side, like breathing, trying to psych himself up.
Doing the deep breathing exercises.
Doing the deep breathing. And then it's like leap of faith that you were talking about. He jumps. And I thought, oh God, did he just kill himself? We then see him. He's clearly quite injured. His legs are
both of his legs are broken.
But he's alive. And he then starts to try to army crawl flashing lights come on and you hear someone say, put your arms behind your back, and he gets cuffed. And then the song Forever Young starts to play.
Well, as they zoom in on his face, though, as he's being cuffed, he has a little bit of a smile. And I took this to mean for Rishi that he has taken that leap of faith. He has achieved salvation, if you will, because he is now finally facing the consequences that he felt that he should for being responsible for Diana's death. He didn't go to jail for it. Someone else was framed for it. He's been living with this guilt that he was the one who brought about these circumstances. And it goes back to that thing with Henry Muck being like, I could get arrested for this. People want those consequences because it means that there are real stakes in life. This pornographic world that everyone is living in, there's no real stakes. Everything feels fake and so transactional. Exactly. He has gone through the most extreme version of this journey and taking this leap in the end to bring about those consequences for himself. And I think it's like this rebirth that he is offered because, I mean, as far as I can tell, he should have died when he jumped off that balcony, right?
Yes.
And he gets to live, and he gets to live with consequences for his actions, which is finally the freedom that he's been seeking. I think that that's like the hope for him. And the song that plays is Forever Young by Alphaville, which is a great song. And it's funny because like we talked about that line from Jim Diker, we age without getting older, right? The idea of Forever Young, to me, it's this idea of, again, being reborn on a religious level, right? And also for your theories, one of the lines from the song is the music's played by the madman. So we have the madman in the room playing the music. We've got Mad Men, your references to other TV shows. I think nothing in the show is an accident. So for those of you who experienced this, watching it once, like I did that first time, and we're like, I hated this episode. Hopefully through the listening to this, we've been recording for 3 hours, whatever we edit it down to. Hopefully through the listening to this, you have come out the other side and realized that there is so much of value in this episode. And yes, it's on the finance light side, but I do think in terms of like the spiritual journey that all our characters are on, I think this was an excellent episode at the end of the day. I can't believe I'm saying that.
What letter would you give it, Jen? You gave it a D the first time. What are we?
What did I say? D minus. I hated it so much, but I hated my experience of watching it. I've never felt this way. Even during the Wong Wei trade episode, even during the Rishi episodes where they were, I was just like, oh, but there's so much finance that offset for me, like the negative character angles or whatever. This didn't have enough finance to defray that in my mind, but I do think that it was a beautifully written episode. I mean, if anything, I just think there's so much slant rhyme in this show in the sense that they never really answer questions definitively when you're watching it. The fact that you and I disagree on so many potential interpretations, I think is really telling about the brilliance of the show. That, okay, how does Yaz really feel about Hayley? Is she threatened by her? Does she think she still has control? Like, we don't know. We have more questions. I feel like we end up like Jonah talking to Whitney, that we have more questions than answers at the end of this episode, which is a great place to be halfway through the season. Whereas last season, after episode 4, I was like, oh, we're done with Lumi, right? And it was like, no, we're setting up an entire second act. I feel so deeply invested in this tender plot. And if that was their goal, it certainly worked.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I agree with all of this. It's funny because, again, I hated the ending so much. I still almost felt like the Rishi episode, my first watch of that, I almost hated more just because I didn't realize that's where we were going. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we had never seen an episode like that. And now I'm like kind of primed to expect some here and there, that it's like this type of a show. But it's so funny how like you go back the second time and you're like, wow, there's so much in here, even though I hated watching it, but it was good. And I also got excited because of the convert stuff. And then also like, they like did some math. They did some math on a chalkboard. Like, that was exciting. So
250 plus 250 equals 100 math, you mean?
Yeah, my math. So, all right. So really quickly, who are we bullish and bearish on? I assume we're bearish on Rishi, but like also, are you bullish on him? Because I don't know. At least
he's officially hit rock bottom.
Rock bottom.
Like, this is the bottomest of rock bottom. It is the most literal rock bottom. Yeah, there's nowhere Rishi can go but up from here. So I guess I also wonder I don't know if Jim Diker is dead or not. But so I'm actually bullish on Whitney because Whitney seems to be coming into his full power because he's moving all the chess pieces on the board where he wants. And I'm really excited to see Whitney do more rather than being this like quiet guy in the background. I want more of Whitney. I'm kind of bullish on Jonah. I'm excited that they're bringing him back, and I want to see him try to take his revenge on Whitney.
Yeah.
And I'm bearish on I'm very bearish on Jim Diker.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm bearish on Jim Diker.
If
I'm
he's
bearish on Rishi. I'm just so sad for him. I mean, we love the actor so much, and I want him to
We love this character.
Like, I want there to be redemption for him. Like, I want there to be some way that he can find himself out of it. People do get second acts. Even fucking Firefest, dude. Or they
What I felt was so unnecessarily cruel, and I think I said to you in a text when I watched it, is listen, I thought it was horrible what they did at the end of season 3 when they killed his wife. I thought that was a bridge too far. I thought they could just have Rishi Heff's fall from grace, and it didn't need to be so extreme and go into actual life or death.
Yeah.
And now we took that character who was so beaten up, we gave him a glimpse at like a redemption through working with Harper, and then we took him down to a level that I didn't know we could go to that is so horrible. Yeah. And just, I think it's just grittier than I wanted the show to be.
Same.
And I wanted it to be like light, fluffy hedge funds, like blah, 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 blah. And this was just so dark.
Yeah.
And executed so brilliantly artistically that it took me to that dark place. And I didn't want to feel that darkness, basically.
Look, we had heard that this season is darker than the past seasons, although I still felt that White Mischief was a very dark episode. And I thought that the ending was a very dark last season. The way that Charles died and like we had to see his like decomposing body, I was like freaking the F out of, and Jen's just rolling her eyes. And honestly, unfortunately, I'm not that bullish on Harper and freaking Eric because I don't believe that they have a good freaking trade here. I'm sure that like they're going to have some wins because we still have 4 episodes left.
I think
but
from
like,
a narrative arc standpoint, we assume that there's going to be
going to have to be some kind of like, will they win in this whole thing? It's not just they put on a short and the short blows up. So I feel like there's going to have to be some of that. So I'm bullish only because like we still got 4 episodes to go. But like fundamentally, I'm bearish on this freaking short. I think short selling just doesn't work. We saw this with the GameStop episode.
Well, we had the short of the century with Pierpoint, where they had everything right, and they still didn't win.
They should go and short Pierpoint, by the way. They're like buying Pierpoint, and maybe they should be shorting them. But so anyway, so thank you guys for doing this with us. We have so much fun, and we've done a 180. We are now airing this on both the big podcast and the little podcast, but we have all of the episodes in one place. So if you are on the little podcast, we have it broken down and like playlists based on seasons and all that. So follow us wherever. But thank you guys for being on this journey with us. Any comments you have, give us your theories. We read them all. We have no more insights beyond just us doing this blind because we are doing this before we get to read articles that come out where people share
like scrounging up philosophical texts I read in 2002 when I was a freshman in college. Like, this is a mental lift.
I mean, amazing. So with that, we will see you next time, and happy industry night. Bye, guys.